Before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. The rain began to fall as soon as the old truck rumbled its way down the narrow, winding path. It was the kind of rain that seemed endless, the kind that blurs the world into shadows and makes everything feel distant, unreachable. The windshield wipers couldn't keep up with the torrential downpour, and the low hum of the engine was barely louder than the patter of raindrops against the metal. Inside the truck, the only sounds were the occasional creak of the vehicle and the faint static from the radio, which refused to tune to anything other than a series of random, haunting bursts of static. As the rain fell harder, the trees surrounding the path thickened, their gnarled branches reaching like arms to obscure the road ahead. Ahead, through the mist, a silhouette began to emerge. A lodge, half hidden by the trees, its dark outline barely visible in the storm. The tires of the truck spun on the slick, wet ground as it slowed to a crawl, the vehicle's headlights casting long shadows over the forest floor. The lodge looked old, abandoned, and in some ways far too inviting. Almost there, the driver muttered to himself, trying to ignore the unease creeping into his chest. It had been years since he'd last visited the place. When the invitation had come, it was simple, just a request to meet, nothing more. But now, with the storm around him and the solitude settling in, something felt off. The truck finally came to a stop just outside the lodge, the tires crunching on the gravel driveway. The engine's low hum fell silent as the driver stepped out into the rain, the cold air biting at his skin. There was no one around. No other vehicles. No signs of life. The lodge loomed above him, its windows dark, the heavy wooden door standing slightly ajar. An eerie silence enveloped the place, the kind that made even the rain seem distant, almost unreal. The only sound now was the hiss of the rain as it pounded against the roof of the lodge, mixing with the faint crackle of thunder far off in the distance. He could feel it then, the sensation that someone or something was watching. He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder, but there was nothing behind him except the thick forest swallowed in the rain. A flicker of movement at the window of the lodge caught his eye. Someone, or something, was there. Without thinking, he made his way up the steps, his boots heavy on the old wood. The door creaked open on its own as he reached for the handle, an unsettling groan filling the air. He stepped inside, greeted by the smell of old wood, damp earth, and something faintly metallic. The fire pit in the center of the room was cold, its embers long since gone out. There was a low, hollow sound from the far corner of the lodge, like something shifting or perhaps breathing. His heart skipped a beat. A voice, soft and just barely audible, seemed to whisper from the shadows. "You're here?" The door slammed shut behind him, cutting off any chance of escape. The door's heavy thud echoed in the silence, the sound reverberating through the lodge as if the walls themselves were alive. For a moment, the driver stood frozen, his breath visible in the cold air. The wind outside howled against the building, rattling the windows, but inside there was only an eerie stillness. The fire pit at the center of the room was now the focal point of his attention. It had once been a warm, welcoming place for many, he imagined, gathering friends, laughter, stories shared over crackling flames. But now, the fire pit was nothing more than a cold, empty shell, its stones blackened with soot, the faint remnants of ash scattered across the floor. The darkness of the room seemed to press closer, thick and oppressive. "Hello." His voice barely reached his own ears. It seemed swallowed up by the room, lost in the weight of the silence. There was no response, but that faint sound, like shifting or breathing, came again, closer this time. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end as he slowly turned, scanning the lodge's interior. The walls were adorned with old photographs, faded portraits of long-forgotten faces. They stared down at him with vacant expressions, their eyes seeming to follow his every movement. The wooden beams above were dusted with cobwebs, their intricate carvings almost lost to time. The floor beneath him creaked underfoot, sending shivers up his spine. A faint light flickered from the far side of the room. He couldn't quite make it out, but it seemed to beckon him, drawing him toward it like a moth to a flame. Against his better judgment, he took a step forward, the cold air growing denser with each passing moment. The light grew stronger as he approached, revealing an old beaten-up door at the back of the lodge. Before he could reach it, a voice, distinct and clear, spoke from the shadows. "You shouldn't have come." The voice was soft, like a whisper carried on the wind, but there was something chilling about it. The driver's heart skipped a beat, and he instinctively took a step back, his pulse racing. His eyes darted around, searching for the source of the voice, but the room was empty, no one in sight. "Who's there?" His voice cracked, tension coiling in his chest. No answer came. Instead, the rain outside seemed to intensify, the wind rattling the walls, making the timber groan in protest. The light from the back door flickered again, brighter this time as if it were urging him forward. The air seemed to thicken with an almost tangible presence, as though something was standing right beside him, invisible, watching, waiting. The driver's instinct screamed at him to leave, to turn around and run. But the curiosity inside him pushed him forward, an insatiable need to understand what was happening. He reached the door. It was old, the wood warped and weathered with age. A brass handle, tarnished and chipped, gleamed faintly in the dim light. With trembling hands he reached for it. The moment his fingers brushed against the handle, a low rumble of thunder shook the lodge, and the ground beneath him seemed to shift slightly, as though the earth itself was unsettled. Without thinking, he twisted the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading downward into complete darkness. The smell of damp earth and rotting wood was stronger here, the air thick with the scent of decay. There was no light from below, just an impenetrable blackness that seemed to swallow everything in its path. His heart hammered in his chest. The voice had warned him. The whispers from the shadows, the sounds of movement in the dark, and now this descent into the unknown. "Don't go down there," the voice was back, a low murmur in his ear. "It's already too late." But the driver could not stop himself. The pull was too strong, too compelling. He took the first step down, the sound of his boots echoing in the narrow, hollow space. The air grew colder, the darkness deeper, and with each step, the world above seemed to fade further away, leaving only the oppressive weight of the dark and the growing sense that something was waiting for him at the bottom. The sound of his breathing was the only thing keeping him anchored in reality. Every step felt like a violation of his very existence, a step further away from safety, and yet he could not stop. The staircase seemed endless, stretching further down into the abyss, until finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reached the bottom. The air here was stifling, heavy with a strange, musty smell. His eyes slowly adjusted to the dark, but there was nothing to see, just shadows, endless and all-encompassing. The faintest glow, like the distant remnants of a dying ember, illuminated the far wall, casting long, twisted shadows across the floor. And then he heard it again, the breathing. Louder now. It was coming from the shadows. From somewhere deep in the dark. Something was moving. He could feel it, right behind him, breathing down his neck. He spun around, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the darkness. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice shaking. The only answer was the sound of the wind howling through the trees above, and the soft rustling of something just beyond his reach. The darkness in the room pressed in around him, thick and suffocating, as if the air itself were conspiring to keep him from moving. The breath that had sounded so close moments ago had faded, but the weight of its presence lingered, wrapping around him like a second skin. It felt wrong. Everything about this place felt wrong. He took a slow, measured step backward, his foot landing on the cold, damp floor. The wood creaked beneath him, groaning in protest as though the very foundation of the lodge was alive, reacting to his every move. The air smelled of mildew and rot, mingling with the faintest trace of something metallic, a scent that made his stomach turn. The distant embers' glow flickered again, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls, warping and twisting into grotesque shapes. His eyes darted around, searching for some sign of movement, some indication that he wasn't truly alone. But there was nothing, only the oppressive quiet and the damp, heavy air. And then he felt it. A subtle shift beneath his feet, a barely perceptible tremor, as though something deep in the earth was stirring. The driver froze, his heart pounding as he strained to hear any sound that might explain the sensation. It wasn't the wind or the rain outside, nor was it the house settling on its old foundation. This was something else, something alive. A soft, almost imperceptible scraping sound came from the corner of the room, like nails dragging across wood. His breath hitched in his throat as he turned to face the noise, but his eyes met nothing but the black, endless expanse of shadows. The faint light from the distant ember seemed to grow dimmer, as if the darkness were swallowing it whole. He took another step backward, and then another, until the air grew thicker with the sensation of being watched. The feeling was overwhelming now, like 1,000 unseen eyes were fixed on him from the shadows, judging, waiting. His foot landed on something soft. The floorboards gave way slightly under the pressure, sinking just enough to send a jolt of panic through him. He stumbled forward, catching himself against the wall as the floor beneath him seemed to groan in protest. It was as if something below the surface was alive, trying to push its way through, yearning to escape. There was a loud crack, followed by the unmistakable sound of something breaking. something large, something buried deep beneath the floor. And then the whispers began. They were soft at first, barely audible, like the sound of wind through the trees or the rustling of leaves. But they grew louder, more distinct, more insistent. The driver's heart pounded as the voices seemed to call to him, beckoning him toward the very spot where he stood. He took a step back, his hand groping for the edge of the wall, desperate for something solid to hold onto. But there was nothing. The shadows around him seemed to stretch and shift, as though the lodge itself were alive, its walls closing in around him, suffocating him with their dark presence. And then, as the whispers reached a fever pitch, the floor beneath his feet cracked open. It was slow at first, a faint sound like the breaking of brittle wood, but then the crack widened, spreading across the room with a sickening, grinding noise. He stumbled back, his heart racing as the floorboards split apart in jagged, uneven lines. The edges splintered, revealing what lay beneath. Dozens of them. The eyes were large, bulging, and white, pale as the moon, set into a dark, pulsating mass of what appeared to be flesh, rotting and twisted. They blinked, their lids scraping against the surface, and the sound of their movement was like a chorus of nails dragging across metal. The mass shifted beneath the floor, a writhing, organic thing, its edges spilling out in a slow, almost liquid motion. The driver's breath caught in his throat. He stepped back, his mind racing, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He wanted to scream, but his voice was caught in his chest, suffocated by the sheer horror of it. The eyes continued to blink, their gaze following him with unnerving precision. And then, through the crack in the floor, something began to emerge. A thick, black tendril, slick with moisture, reaching upward toward him. It moved with a terrifying speed, curling and twisting like a serpent, its dark surface glistening in the faint light. The driver's heart pounded in his ears as he scrambled backward, his feet slipping on the wet, rotting floorboards. He stumbled, catching himself just as the tendril reached out, brushing against his ankle with an icy touch. He recoiled, gasping for air, as the tendril retreated into the darkness, dragging the mass beneath the floor with it. The eyes blinked one last time, and then the darkness swallowed them whole. The whispers faded, leaving behind an unnerving silence. For a long moment, the driver stood frozen in place, his mind reeling, his body trembling with fear. He wanted to run, to escape, but his legs felt like lead. He couldn't tear his gaze away from the spot where the eyes had been. The memory of their haunting, unblinking stare burned into his mind. But there was something else now, a low, guttural sound like something crawling beneath the floor, shifting and writhing in the darkness. And from the far corner of the room, a single word whispered on the wind. "Join us." The whisper hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It wasn't a voice like the ones before. This time, it was as though the words were part of the very air around him, a tangible presence that pressed against his chest, making each breath a labor. "Join us." The driver's heart raced, his mind spinning. He had to leave. He had to get out of this place, this nightmare, but his legs felt rooted to the spot. The words echoed through his mind like a dark chant, a call from somewhere deep below. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, any way to rid himself of this suffocating, unholy presence. But there was nothing. The shadows had deepened further, swallowing the edges of the lodge. The small flicker of light from the ember in the corner now seemed like a dying star, barely holding on to its life in the encroaching darkness. The entire room had become a hollow shell, a space suspended between time and reality, where only the whispers and the darkness truly existed. Then the floor shifted again. The crack where the tendrils had emerged was widening. Slowly, ever so slowly, it spread further across the room. The air grew heavier with the scent of decay, the stench of something long dead, buried, forgotten. A low, vibrating hum resonated from beneath the floor, as if something immense was stirring, its slumber disturbed. The driver's breath hitched in his throat. It was happening again. He could hear it now, faint but unmistakable, the sound of movement coming from beneath the earth. Not the slow, agonizing drag of the tendrils, but something else. Something bigger, something ancient. With a sudden, unnatural jerk, the floorboards buckled, and the mass beneath shifted. The first of the black tendrils shot out once more, but this time it was different. It was thicker, more forceful, and it grasped the air like a predator, as if it had found its prey. The driver lurched backward, his breath catching in his chest. He wasn't sure what he was seeing anymore. Was this real? Was any of this real? The very air felt like it was choking him, the pressure mounting with every passing second, as if the weight of the entire forest was closing in on the lodge. His gaze snapped upward, desperate for some semblance of clarity. The walls, which had seemed so solid before, now warped and shifted in the dim light. They seemed to ripple, like a reflection in water disturbed by a breeze. The shadows cast by the flickering ember twisted, contorting into shapes that resembled faces, hollow, twisted faces with wide, vacant eyes that stared directly at him. And then, for the first time since entering, he heard something else, a voice. But not just any voice. It was the voice of someone he knew, someone he had never expected to hear again. "Why did you come?" It was a soft, sorrowful whisper, a voice that dripped with regret. "You never should have come." The driver's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. He had heard it many years ago, long before this nightmare began, long before the invitation. His heart clenched in his chest, a knot of dread twisting deep within him. This was a voice from the past, a voice from a time he had buried, a time that was meant to stay buried. His mind flashed back to that long-forgotten summer, when he and his friends had come to this very lodge, laughing, carefree, with no idea of the dark history it held. They had stayed for a few nights, just as the rain fell outside, just as it had now, but they had left without a second thought, not knowing that something had followed them back, something dark, something that would never leave. Until now. Who is that?" The driver whispered, his voice shaking. He didn't want to hear the answer. He didn't want to know. The air around him grew colder still, and the floor beneath him creaked again, but this time it wasn't the normal groan of an old building. It was a low, deep sound, as if something ancient, something immense, was waking beneath him. "Do you remember?" the voice asked, but this time it wasn't just one voice. It was a chorus, 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, each one dripping with sorrow and pain. "Do you remember what happened here?" The floor cracked wide open, splitting violently in two. From the depths of the earth came a massive tendril, far larger than the others, thick and pulsating, its surface slick with some dark, viscous substance. It rose up from the broken floor like a snake, its writhing form reaching for him, its length coiling around the walls, the ceiling, as though it sought to claim the entire room. The driver stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest as the floor buckled beneath his feet. The very ground felt alive, as though the lodge itself were trying to swallow him whole. And then, something horrifying happened. The once empty photographs on the walls began to change. Faces appeared where there had been none before, twisted, gaunt faces staring down at him with wide, unblinking eyes. The voices, those voices from the past, rose louder, the sound building to a crescendo, until it felt like the walls were going to cave in. His head was spinning, his thoughts a blur, and all he could hear were the whispers, the calls, the invitations. "Join us, join us." And then, from behind him, a cold breath washed over his neck. It was the feeling of being watched, of being known by something far older, far darker than any human had ever known. He spun around, but the shadows were there, waiting. He could feel their presence, their unrelenting gaze. But there was no one standing there, no physical shape. It was in the air itself. The darkness was watching him. And then, as if on cue, the doors to the lodge slammed open with a deafening crash, sending the wind howling inside, carrying with it the scent of fresh earth, of something ancient, of something that had been waiting. He had no choice now. The darkness had claimed him. He ran. The door slammed open with an unholy force, the wind tearing through the lodge like a living thing. The driver barely had time to react before the air was filled with a cacophony of sounds. The storm outside now raging in full force, the wind howling as it swept through the broken threshold. The trees beyond the door were obscured by the sheets of rain, their twisted branches swaying like skeletal arms reaching for him. The darkness outside seemed endless, a deep black void that threatened to swallow him whole. For a moment, he hesitated at the threshold, his mind screaming at him to run, but his feet remained rooted to the floor. It was as if the lodge had a hold on him, keeping him locked in place, unable to break free from the grip of the unseen forces within. The wind howled louder, and a distant crack of thunder shook the very ground beneath him, jolting him into motion. He bolted for the door, stumbling over the uneven floor, nearly falling as the floorboards shifted beneath his feet. His breath came in ragged gasps as he darted into the storm, the rain hitting him like ice-cold needles. The forest was alive. The moment he stepped outside, the air seemed to change, thick with moisture, heavy with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. The trees loomed above him, their branches creaking and groaning as if warning him to stay away. The sound of the rain against the canopy was deafening, yet it was accompanied by a low, persistent hum, like the beating of some vast, unseen heart deep within the woods. The driver ran, pushing through the underbrush, his feet slipping in the mud. Every branch that reached out to snag him felt like a claw, pulling him deeper into the forest, into the unknown. His mind was spinning, each thought jumbled with the next. The lodge had come alive, the darkness had come alive, and now the forest seemed to respond in kind. Every step he took felt as though the very earth itself was shifting beneath him, as though the forest were not just a place, but a living, breathing entity, its heart beating in time with his own frantic pulse. The wind screamed louder, whipping around him as the trees bent under the force. Lightning flashed, illuminating the twisted branches and the thick, inky shadows that seemed to stretch out from them, reaching toward him like fingers. He could hear something behind him, footsteps, faint at first but unmistakable. His heart skipped a beat and he dared not look back. The feeling that something was following him was more than just instinct. There was a presence, a force he couldn't explain. Someone, was hunting him. His feet carried him forward, his mind fixed on escape, but the deeper he ran, the more he felt the forest closing in around him. The trees seemed to shift and move, their trunks bending and twisting in unnatural ways, as though they were deliberately redirecting him, pushing him further into the heart of the woods. The path he had been following was no longer clear. The world around him had become a labyrinth of shadows and towering trees, each one more grotesque than the last, their bark twisted and gnarled like the fingers of some ancient creature. And then, without warning, the ground beneath him gave way. The driver let out a shout as his foot slipped into a hidden hole in the earth, sending him tumbling forward into a deep, narrow pit. He crashed to the ground, his body slamming into something hard. Pain shot through his side, but he forced himself to move, gasping for air as the wind above him howled like some beast of the night. The hole was deep, the walls slick with moisture, and as he scrambled to his feet, he realized the truth: he was trapped. He tried to climb the walls of the pit, but the earth was soft and loose, and each attempt only sent rocks and dirt cascading back into the hole, filling the air with choking dust. His heart raced as he looked up at the trees above him, their dark forms silhouetted against the storm. He could hear the sounds of movement, something shifting in the shadows, something large, something hunting. "Help!" he muttered, his voice barely audible above the storm. But there was no one. No answer came, only the howling wind and the oppressive silence that seemed to blanket everything. And then the whispers returned. They were faint at first, like a distant murmur, but as they grew louder, he could hear the words clearly. They were not the same words as before, not the voice of the past, but something else, something darker, something more ancient. "Don't run." The words echoed around him, filling the pit with a cold, suffocating presence. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. His eyes darted around, searching for the source of the voice, but the darkness was complete. There was nothing but the rain, the wind, and the oppressive weight of the forest closing in around him. He could feel it now, the presence. It was close, closer than ever before. The whispers became more frantic, more desperate, like a chant, a song sung by 1,000 voices, each one pushing him deeper into the pit. His skin crawled and a cold sweat broke out across his brow. It wasn't just the storm or the rain or the wind that felt wrong. It was the very air itself, the weight of it, the heaviness of it, pressing down on him. He had to escape. He had to get out. With one final burst of desperation, he planted his hands against the walls of the pit and pushed himself upward, scrambling for purchase. His fingers scraped against the wet earth, the rocks slipping from his grasp, but he fought with everything he had. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't let the forest claim him, let whatever it was that had been following him, closing in on him, catch him. And then, just as his fingers reached the edge, he heard it, a sound, low and guttural, rising from somewhere deep within the earth, a rumbling that seemed to shake the very foundation of the forest. It was the sound of something waking, and it was coming for him. The rumble from deep beneath the earth grew louder, a low, grinding growl that seemed to echo through the very bones of the forest. The air itself seemed to shift with it, thickening as if the land was alive and stirring beneath his feet. The driver's fingers, still gripping the edges of the pit, trembled with a mix of fear and desperation. He pulled himself up once more, pushing through the thick, damp earth, but each movement felt sluggish, as though the very ground was resisting him. A sudden jolt of pain shot up his arm as a sharp rock scraped across his skin. He gritted his teeth and climbed higher, his heart hammering, every breath shallow with panic. He was so close, just a few more inches, but the ground beneath him gave way once more. His foot slipped, sending him tumbling backward, the jagged edges of the pit scraping against his legs as he fell back to the bottom with a sickening thud. For a moment he lay still, his breath coming in short, frantic gasps. The world around him was spinning, the rain battering against his face, the wind howling like some ancient predator circling its prey. The whispers, those maddening whispers, grew louder, more insistent, wrapping around him like an invisible chain. He could feel their cold, clammy fingers tightening, dragging him deeper into the earth. "Don't run. Join us." He forced himself to his knees, gasping for air, his heart racing in his chest. The pit felt colder now, the air heavier. The rumble from below had intensified, shaking the ground beneath him, vibrating through his very bones. He could hear it now, the faint sound of movement beneath the earth, like something large, something ancient, shifting its massive weight in the dark. It was waking. He could hear it now more clearly than ever before. It wasn't just the sound of roots and rocks moving, not just the shifting of the earth. It was something else, something alive. The earth trembled again, more violently this time, and he could feel the soil beneath him give way as the pit itself seemed to expand. His pulse raced as he looked up, desperate for any sign of escape, but the trees above him were a blur in the storm, their branches swaying violently in the wind, the dark canopy nearly swallowing the sky. Something was coming. The tendrils, the massive eyes that had been beneath the lodge, had it been some sort of warning? Had it been the beginning? The forest, the earth, the very ground beneath him seemed to be alive with this ancient force, this presence that had slumbered for centuries, perhaps millennia. And now it was waking and it was coming for him. Suddenly the rumble stopped. The silence was deafening. The air seemed to hold its breath, the storm outside momentarily quieting, as though the earth itself was waiting. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if he had imagined it all. Maybe it was just the storm, just the wind. But deep inside he knew the truth. It wasn't over. It's here. The ground beneath him buckled with terrifying force. The earth seemed to split open, not just the pit, but the very land around it, as though some great force were tearing through the ground. And then, through the newly formed cracks, something began to emerge. A massive, writhing shape, dark and slick, coated in wet soil and decaying vegetation. It was enormous. A tendril, thicker than any of the ones that had emerged from the lodge, shot up from the depths of the earth, its surface black and glistening like oil. It curled and twisted, reaching for the trees, the sky, as though trying to pull the entire forest down into the pit. The ground trembled with every movement, the very air thickening with the stench of decay and something far worse, a hunger that clawed at the edges of his sanity. He stumbled backward, his legs giving out beneath him as the earth continued to split apart, and the thing emerged fully, coiling itself into the air like a serpent, its black surface slick with moisture, pulsing as though it had a heartbeat of its own. It towered above him, a grotesque, writhing mass of darkness, its tendrils reaching out in every direction. His mind reeled as he watched the shape, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. He could see movement within it, shifting forms, undulating shadows, things that were not quite human but not quite anything else either. They shifted and writhed, their shapes barely perceptible, as though the thing was a mass of countless horrific entities, all vying for space within the dark cocoon. But there was something worse. From within the mass there was an eye. It was enormous, its iris a swirling vortex of black and white, the center an abyss that seemed to pull at his very soul. It was staring at him, watching him. The whispers came again, but this time they were louder, clearer, their voices growing more distinct. "You've been chosen." The driver's body was frozen in terror. He couldn't move, couldn't scream. His limbs were numb, his mind clouded by the sheer presence of the thing before him. He had never seen anything like it. Nothing in his nightmares, nothing in the stories he'd heard, could compare to the monstrosity now looming above him. He felt it then, the pressure. It wasn't just the weight of the forest, the storm, or the earth itself. It was something else, something far more ancient, far more powerful. It was a force of nature, a force that had been waiting, biding its time beneath the earth, and now that it had awakened, there was no stopping it. The tendrils swayed, their massive forms twisting and curling through the air like serpents. The trees groaned in protest as the thing reached out, and the very ground beneath him seemed to shift and shake in response to its movements. The sky darkened further, the storm growing fiercer with every passing second, until it felt as though the entire world was coming undone. The driver's heart was pounding in his chest as he fought to break free of the paralysis that gripped him. The whispers surrounded him now, the voices becoming a chorus, filling his head with their maddening chant. "Join us, join us." He could feel the earth pulling at him, dragging him closer to the thing, to the mass of tendrils and eyes that seemed to want him, to need him. It was more than just a physical pull, it was a compulsion, a need deep within his soul. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to run, to escape, but the force around him was too strong. And then, from the center of the mass, the voice came again. This time it was not a whisper. It was clear. It was loud. "You are one of us now." The voice echoed through his mind, each word landing like a blow to his sanity. "You are one of us now." The words didn't just come from the air. They seemed to resonate through the earth beneath him, vibrating in his very bones, wrapping around him like invisible chains. He could feel the pull deep within his chest, a weight pressing on him from all sides, as though the forest itself was inhaling, drawing him deeper into its fold. The tendrils shifted once more, their movement unervingly deliberate, as though they were aware of him, aware of his fear. The massive eye within the writhing mass blinked slowly, the darkness within it swirling with unnatural force, as though it were alive, hungry for something far older and more ancient than himself. Its gaze was fixed on him, and it sent a wave of cold dread coursing through his veins. He tried to move, to run, but his body was not his own. The weight of the air around him, the suffocating pressure of the earth's breath, seemed to hold him in place. He was trapped, not just physically but mentally. The whispers, which had once been distant and maddening, now grew clearer, more distinct. They seemed to come from all directions, from deep within the earth, from the trees that loomed above, from the very air that surrounded him. "You belong to us." The driver's pulse quickened, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He wanted to scream, to tear himself free from whatever dark power had ensnared him, but the force pressing on him was overwhelming. His body shook with the effort to break free, but the ground seemed to shift beneath him, pulling him closer to the writhing mass. His feet sank into the mud, the wet earth clutching at his boots, dragging him deeper into its grasp. The eye blinked again, and with that simple movement, a wave of vertigo crashed over him, pulling him into the abyss. His vision blurred, the world around him warping, spinning in unnatural ways. He tried to fight it, tried to push against the suffocating blackness that threatened to overtake him, but his body refused to obey. His limbs felt heavy, as though they had been submerged in thick, viscous liquid, each movement an agonizing struggle. And then, just as the darkness seemed ready to swallow him whole, something changed. The storm, the wind, the rain. They all fell silent, as though the world had paused, holding its breath. The very earth beneath him seemed to still, to hold its pulse for a moment, and the air became thick with a sense of expectation. The whispers, too, faded into an unnatural hush. And then a new voice, a voice that was not part of the chorus, spoke. It was deep, ancient, and it came from everywhere. "You have awoken what should never have been disturbed." The words seemed to vibrate through the ground, sending a jolt of cold dread through his spine. He tried to look up, but his head felt heavy, as though it were being weighed down by the very force of the words. His eyes, half closed in a daze, focused on the center of the writhing mass, where the massive eye stared down at him, blinking slowly, its dark center swirling with shadows. "You have broken the seal, and now you will pay the price." The voice was not just a sound, it was a presence. It felt like the entire forest was speaking, like the ancient woods themselves were alive, aware, judging him. The earth beneath him trembled again, but this time, it wasn't just the mass of tendrils shifting. No, this was something deeper. The roots of the trees, the very soil itself, were alive. They were moving. He could see it now. Beneath the ground, beneath the layers of earth, something was shifting. The trees were groaning as if in pain, their trunks bending and twisting as dark veins pulsed beneath their bark. The forest was not simply an environment, it was part of the living entity beneath the earth, a part of the thing that had been disturbed, that had been awoken from its slumber. The earth beneath his feet cracked open again, the crevices spreading wide, exposing something that had lain buried for millennia, a massive root system, thick and black, spiraling upward from the very core of the earth. The tendrils, slick with dark, decaying sap, writhed and lashed like serpents, and they seemed to move with purpose, converging on him, their cold, alien touch wrapping around his legs. His body screamed in terror, but his mind was numb. He couldn't move, couldn't fight. The whispers had become a chant, a low, pulsating rhythm that filled his mind, pushing out all other thoughts. He was becoming part of the forest, becoming part of the thing that lay beneath it. The line between himself and the thing that lived within the earth was blurring, dissolving with every passing second. "Join us, come closer, become one." The words, once a whisper, were now a thunderous roar in his ears, vibrating through his very soul. The force of it was too much, too overwhelming. The mass of tendrils, the writhing darkness, was closing in around him. He could feel it, a pull deep within his chest, like a gravity from within the earth itself, dragging him toward the mass, toward the heart of the darkness that had awoken. With a final, desperate gasp, the driver tore his gaze away from the thing and looked around. The forest, the trees, the very ground beneath him, they were all moving, all shifting, as if they were part of a vast, living organism. The sky above had turned black, the clouds swirling in a violent vortex, the wind howling as if calling to something distant. It was as though the storm had become a part of the earth itself, an extension of the thing that had been sleeping beneath it. And then, as if sensing his will to fight, the force around him tightened. The tendrils coiled tighter, pulling him toward the center of the mass, dragging him closer to the eye. It was no longer a choice. It was no longer a decision. He could feel himself being drawn in, pulled into the heart of the darkness, the deep, endless void that had awakened with his arrival. And with that, he was consumed. The last thing he heard was the voice, now a low, guttural growl reverberating through his mind. "You are ours now. Forever." The sensation of being consumed was not instantaneous. It was like being submerged in cold, thick liquid, slow, inevitable, and suffocating. The driver's body felt weightless, floating within the darkness, caught between the pull of the mass and the oppressive stillness that surrounded him. There was no longer any sense of time or space. He had no idea if it had been seconds or hours since the tendrils had first wrapped around him, dragging him deeper into the abyss. He could feel his skin growing numb, the edges of his consciousness fading as though something was pulling at the very essence of who he was. The voices, the whispers, the chorus that had once been maddening now felt like a distant murmur, a lullaby laced with dread. They wrapped around him like a blanket, thick and unyielding. He could hear them, feel them, yet they no longer made sense. The words seemed to bleed into one another, becoming a single oppressive sound that vibrated through his very being. "Join us, become one." The words were everywhere, inescapable, echoing through the void. He tried to reach out, tried to scream, but there was no air to scream into, no sound to escape his lips. His body felt heavy, as though it was sinking into the earth itself, the tendrils that had captured him twisting and tightening around him, pulling him deeper. But then a shift. A light, a faint, flickering light, appeared in the distance like a dying star in the endless black. At first, it was nothing more than a small pinprick of brightness, barely visible against the consuming void, but it grew, pulsing with rhythm as though it were alive, as though it had a heartbeat. He could feel its pull, its warmth, a warmth that felt foreign and safe in the midst of the cold and the crushing weight of the dark. The whispers faltered, and for a moment the oppressive silence that had swallowed him whole seemed to shift, giving way to the light. The tendrils around him loosened, if only for a second, allowing him to move. But he didn't hesitate. Every instinct screamed at him to escape, to reach for that light. His body, though heavy, responded, and with what little strength he had left, he pushed toward it, his hands brushing against the slick tendrils, feeling their cold, clammy surface as he fought against them. As he moved toward the light, the ground beneath him began to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. It was as though the very earth was breathing, alive with the heartbeat of something vast, something ancient. The forest had become more than just trees and soil. It had become a living organism, a vast, pulsating entity that had been waiting patiently for its time to come again. The light grew brighter, and with it, the weight of the dark lessened. His vision, once clouded with dread, began to clear, and he could see it now, the source of the light. It wasn't a star, nor was it a flame. It was a door. A massive, swirling door made of light and shadow, its edges shimmering with an ethereal glow, framed by the roots of towering trees that bent around it like an archway. The door seemed to pulse with a rhythmic energy, each beat resonating deep within his chest, drawing him closer. The whispers grew quieter, the tendrils' grip weakening as he neared the opening. It was as if the door were a gateway, a passage from one realm to another, a path out of the nightmare he had been trapped in. He reached out, his fingers trembling as he touched the surface of the door. It was warm to the touch, its light seeping into his skin, filling him with a strange sense of calm. For the first time since entering the lodge, he felt something other than fear. There was an undeniable pull, a promise of safety beyond the veil of darkness. But then, just as his fingers grazed the door, something grabbed his wrist, firm, unyielding. He spun around in shock, his heart hammering in his chest, but the light seemed to dim for a brief moment, and the darkness rushed back in. From the depths of the void, the mass of tendrils had followed him. It was no longer just the black, slithering appendages. Now they were part of something larger. The shape that had emerged from the earth, the massive, undulating form, was moving again, its body rippling and shifting as it came closer. The tendrils reached out, not to restrain him this time, but to claim him. A voice, no longer a whisper, but a guttural roar reverberated through his very soul. "You cannot leave." The words crashed into him like a wave, and for the briefest moment, his vision blurred, his limbs trembling with exhaustion. The tendrils wrapped around him, tighter now, as if they were rooting him to the earth. He struggled, pulling against them, but they were too strong, too powerful. He was nothing more than prey in the grasp of something far older than time itself. The light flickered. The door, the only chance of escape, began to shimmer, its edges cracking and fading as if it were being pulled apart. The earth, the forest, the very air around him seemed to shift in response, and he realized in a moment of clarity that this was not a fight between him and the darkness. This was a battle for the fate of the forest, the earth, and everything that lived within it. And he was the key. His hand, still clutched by the tendrils, pressed against the surface of the door once more. This time there was no hesitation. The warmth, the pulse of life that radiated from the door called to him. It wasn't just a way out, it was the only way to stop the thing that had awoken, the thing that had been waiting for him for this moment. If he stepped through, if he chose to leave, there was a price to pay. But if he stayed, the forest, the earth, would devour everything in its path. Join us. The whispers came again, this time laced with something more insidious, something that made his skin crawl. The tendrils pulled him closer to the center of the mass, and for a moment, his will faltered. He was so close to surrendering, to giving in to the darkness, but then a thought, a fleeting image, flashed across his mind. The faces of his friends, the ones who had never left, the ones who had once stood here, had once fallen into the forest's embrace. They hadn't run. They hadn't escaped. He wasn't going to make the same mistake. With a force he didn't know he had left, he tore his hand away from the tendrils, pushing toward the door with every ounce of strength he had. His muscles screamed in protest, his body begging him to stop, but he couldn't. He wouldn't. The door flared with light. And then he stepped through. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, everything changed. It wasn't the sensation of light flooding his senses, nor the sudden warmth of a summer's breeze. It was more like the world had been pulled away, sucked into the very fabric of the universe, leaving behind only the faintest remnants of reality. The air felt different, thicker. The weight of the forest, the pressing, stifling presence of the earth that had been pulling him in, was gone, replaced by a strange, empty stillness. He stood on solid ground, but it wasn't like anything he had ever experienced before. The floor beneath his feet was smooth, almost unnaturally so, like polished stone, yet it shimmered with a soft, ethereal glow. The landscape before him was nothing like the twisted, gnarled forest that had pursued him. There were no trees, no shadows, no oppressive darkness. Instead, the world stretched out in endless swathes of pale light, soft, swirling mist that curled at his ankles and rose up, thickening as it floated toward the sky. The air was quiet, eerily so. There was no wind, no storm, no crashing thunder. Just the silence, deep and unbroken, wrapping itself around him like an unspoken secret. He took a hesitant step forward, his feet sinking lightly into the smooth, glowing surface beneath him. The light shifted and pulsed in response to his movements, as though the ground itself was alive, reacting to his presence. His heart pounded in his chest as he looked around, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. He had stepped through the door, yes, but where had it led him? And more importantly, what had it led him to? The light was soft, but bright enough that it illuminated the strange, fluid space around him. There were no distinct shapes or forms, no horizon to mark the boundary between earth and sky. Instead, the mist seemed to extend infinitely in all directions, a never-ending expanse that pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm. And in the distance, just beyond the reach of the mist, he thought he saw something moving, something large shifting through the haze. He was not alone. Before he could gather his bearings, a voice, soft yet distinct, rang out from the mist. It came from everywhere and nowhere, as if it were spoken directly into his mind. "Welcome to the Hollow." The driver's breath hitched. The Hollow. He had heard whispers about it, rumors from old travelers and strange books he had once read. It was said to be a place between worlds, a void where the lost and the forgotten drifted, caught between realms, never to return. But that was all it had ever been, rumors, fables. Now, standing in the midst of it, the weight of that knowledge crushed him. "The Hollow is a place where the past and future meet," the voice continued, its tone both soothing and ominous. "Where what was and what will be are woven together. You are here because you have crossed the boundary. You are here because you were chosen." A shiver ran down his spine, the words pressing into his skin like an invisible hand. Chosen? He didn't remember being chosen. He hadn't come here by design. He had run, he had escaped. The idea that he had been brought here, that this had been his fate all along, was impossible to fathom. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, the mist around him swirled, coiling like a living thing. The atmosphere shifted again, becoming heavier, more tangible. The ground beneath his feet grew colder, slick with moisture, as if the very air was bleeding into the earth. And then the presence made itself known. From the swirling mist, a figure appeared, shifting, indistinct at first, but slowly forming into something more solid, more real. It was tall, its form draped in dark robes that fluttered even though there was no wind. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but the faint glow of its outline revealed that it had no features, no eyes, no mouth, just the vague suggestion of a face, smooth and unbroken. The figure stepped forward, its presence undeniable. With each step it took, the air seemed to crackle with energy, and the ground beneath it pulsed with an unfamiliar rhythm. You have crossed the threshold, but this is not your final destination. The voice was soft but carried a weight that pressed down on him, the words slipping past his defenses like a slow poison. The hollow is not merely a place. It is a test. The test. The driver's mind raced. A test for what? A test for who? He had been running, fleeing, and now he had found himself here, caught in a space where the laws of nature no longer applied. He wanted to fight, to scream, to tear the figure apart with his hands. But there was nothing. The hollow was a place of emptiness and distortion, and he was powerless to escape it. You are here because you have been marked, the figure continued. Your actions have set in motion a chain of events that cannot be undone. The forest calls to you because it knows you. And you, human, must decide if you will be consumed by it or if you will become something greater. The air seemed to pulse in rhythm with the figure's words, and for a moment, the driver felt an overwhelming sense of familiarity. It was as if the very nature of the hollow knew him, knew everything about him. His past, his failures, his regrets. The forest had called him here for a reason, and now it was time to face the consequences. The hollow tests those who enter, the figure whispered. Those who seek refuge, those who flee. Only those who face the truth can find their way back. The truth. What truth? What had he done to deserve this? Had he truly caused the awakening of whatever dark force lay beneath the earth? Was he the one who had allowed the forest to gain power, to grow in strength? The memories surged within him. Memories of the lost friends, the laughter that had turned to screams, the unanswered questions, the strange lure of the lodge that had drawn him in, just as it had drawn so many before him. The figure raised a hand, and the mist around them thickened, closing in on him from all sides. The air grew colder, and he could feel the weight of the past pressing down on him. For the first time he could see it clearly, what the hollow wanted from him. Face your choices. Face your past. If you can, the figure's voice trailed off, its tone turning almost amused. Only then can you escape this place. The mist around him began to swirl faster now, and the air felt charged, heavy with expectation. He was being tested, not by some external force but by himself. His choices, his actions, they were all part of this nightmare. And the only way out was to confront them. The ground beneath his feet pulsed again, and for a moment, the driver felt as though he was falling, plunging deeper into the very fabric of this world. His thoughts fractured, spinning out of control as the mist closed in around him like a cocoon, and the figure, still silent, still watching, began to fade into the mist. The world seemed to stretch and compress all at once, the air around him thickening until it was almost suffocating. The mist grew colder, wrapping itself around his limbs like chains. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing through the silence, like a drum calling him toward an inevitable end. The figure, no longer just a shadow in the mist, had disappeared entirely, leaving him alone in the swirling fog. The hollow, this strange, timeless space, seemed to pull at his very soul, an unspoken weight pressing down on him, urging him to move forward. But to where? What was it that he was supposed to do? His breath came in shallow gasps, his mind racing. The hollow had given him no answers, only more questions, more cryptic statements about facing his choices, his past. What past? What was it that the forest, the voice, the figure all wanted him to remember? The whispers, soft at first, came back. Faint murmurs that seemed to float just beneath the surface of his consciousness, calling to him, urging him to listen, to understand. They began to grow louder until they filled his ears, swirling around him like a storm. Remember. Remember what you left behind. You cannot escape. He stumbled forward, his feet heavy against the smooth surface beneath him. His mind spun in confusion as images began to flash across his eyes. Flashes of the past, memories he had long buried, things he had wished to forget. He saw faces, distorted and blurred by time, but familiar nonetheless. He saw the woods from his childhood, the summer vacation spent in a small cabin deep in the forest, surrounded by the dense trees and the thick, humid air. There had always been something strange about that place, something off, something that gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. He had dismissed it then, anxiety, fear of the unknown, youthful imagination. But now, standing in the hollow, it all came rushing back. The faces in the woods, the warning signs. The memories sharpened, clearer now, and he saw it. The last time he had visited the lodge. He and his friends, young, full of life, unaware of what lay beneath the surface. They had wandered through the forest, laughing, joking, carefree, not knowing they had awakened something ancient, something hungry. The sound of their laughter echoed in his mind, but there was something off about it. It wasn't a joyful sound. It was too hollow, too empty, like it was being played through the air by something unseen. The laughter twisted, distorted, and then it stopped. The woods had changed that day. The rain had started falling in sheets, blurring everything, until they could barely see the path in front of them. But it wasn't just the rain. There had been something else, something in the air that had felt wrong. The trees had felt alive. The ground had seemed to tremble underfoot, as though the very earth was holding its breath. He had felt it then, something was waiting, and then they had found the lodge. He remembered walking into the dimly lit space, the smell of damp wood and aged furniture filling the air. It had seemed so inviting at the time, an oasis from the storm, a shelter in the middle of nowhere. But the moment they had entered, there had been a shift. The air had thickened and the lodge had felt wrong. They hadn't stayed long. They had left, running into the rain, but the moment they did, he felt a pulse from deep within the ground, from the very trees themselves. It was a warning, though none of them had understood it. Now, standing in the hollow, those memories, those lost pieces of the puzzle, were beginning to make sense. The forest, the earth, had been calling to him long before that night at the lodge. It had been watching, waiting for him to come back. Waiting for them all to come back. You awoke it, the whisper seemed to say. You were always meant to. Suddenly, the ground beneath him began to tremble again, a low, vibrating hum that seemed to originate from deep within the hollow itself. It wasn't like the tremors from before, the ones that had shaken the forest and split the earth. This was more intimate. It was as though the land was reaching for him, touching the deepest corners of his mind, pulling memories to the surface that he hadn't wanted to remember. Come closer. The voice, deep and knowing, reverberated through his very being. Face what you left behind. The mist began to swirl faster now, thicker, until it was more than just a fog. It was alive, alive with the same pulse that ran beneath the surface of the earth. He could feel it, this strange force drawing him deeper into the hollow, into the heart of this forgotten place. It wanted him to remember. It wanted him to see the truth. The mist parted suddenly, revealing a clearing ahead, bathed in soft, pale light. And there, in the center, stood an altar, a simple stone structure, weathered by time but solid and unyielding. Atop the altar lay something wrapped in cloth, something heavy and dark. His heart skipped a beat. It was him. His hands trembled as he stepped forward, the memories now flooding his mind with an intensity he could hardly comprehend. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cloth that covered the figure. The fabric was warm to the touch, as if it had been waiting for him, waiting for this moment. Slowly, carefully, he pulled the cloth back, revealing the face of the person lying there. It was him. But it wasn't. The face was his, yes, but the eyes were hollow, empty. The skin was pale, drained of life, and yet the body lay there, untouched by time. He gasped, stumbling back, his mind reeling. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be. It is your past, the voice intoned, its presence wrapping around him like a suffocating cloud. The version of you that was left behind. The version that never escaped. The version you abandoned when you left. The hollow-eyed face stared back at him, its empty gaze locked onto his own. It was as though the figure was waiting for him to acknowledge it, waiting for him to understand. His breath came in shallow gasps. His hands shook as he took a step back, and for a moment, it felt as though the ground had disappeared entirely, as though he was floating above it. The weight of it all, the truth of what he had done, what had happened that night, it was too much to bear. But the hollow was not done with him yet. You cannot leave, the voice whispered again. You must face what you have created. And then, as if on cue, the mist swirled around him once more, pulling him into its grasp. The mist closed around him like a vice, wrapping him in its cold embrace. The pale light from the altar flickered and wavered, casting strange shadows that twisted and undulated along the edges of his vision. His breath caught in his throat, and his heart hammered in his chest as the figure, the one whose face mirrored his own, lay before him, unmoving. The truth was unbearable. The hollow had led him here for a reason. It had shown him this version of himself, something that shouldn't exist, something that had never existed, yet now, in the eerie silence of this place between worlds, it stood as undeniable as the mist that surrounded him. The driver staggered back, his mind reeling from the enormity of it all. The face, so familiar and yet not his own, seemed to mock him, to accuse him of something he hadn't yet understood. "You left him behind." The voice, deep and resonating with the hollow's cold rhythm, broke the silence once again. It wasn't just a whisper this time. It was a command, a statement of fact, and it sliced through him like a dagger. His mind spun, trying to make sense of the words, of the revelation they carried. Left him behind? What was this version of him? How could something so close, so personal, be a mere figment of this place? "You abandoned what you could have been," the voice continued. "The path you chose was never meant to be. You denied it yourself. And now you must face the consequences." He took another step back, his legs unsteady, the weight of the hollow's accusations pressing down on him. The altar stood unmoving, its presence stark and unyielding. But the body lying upon it was no longer just a symbol of something lost. It was him, another version of him. The man who could have been. The man who had made the choice to stay, to walk into the depths of the forest and face the truth, not run from it. The ground trembled beneath his feet, a low, rumbling vibration that echoed through his bones, as though the earth itself was alive with anticipation. The mist thickened, swirling around his legs, pulling him closer to the altar as if it had a will of its own. He resisted it with all his might, but it was futile. It felt like the very air was suffocating him, drawing him in with an invisible force. The hollow was testing him again. He needed to understand. He needed to confront the version of himself lying on that altar, needed to face the truth that had been buried, hidden from his mind for so long. And so, with trembling hands, he reached forward again, this time not to recoil, but to grasp the figure by the shoulders, to lift it up and look into its face once more. The moment his fingers made contact with the cold, lifeless body, the world around him shattered. The mist was gone. The light, once pale and soft, grew blinding, white-hot, and searing. His hands burned as they touched the figure, and the pain was unbearable, forcing him to cry out, to pull away. But it was too late. The body on the altar moved. Slowly, deliberately, the figure began to rise as though it were alive, as though it had been waiting for him to awaken it, to make contact. Its eyes opened, empty, hollow, but alive. They locked onto him, and for a moment time seemed to stop. The figure rose fully, standing before him, its skin pale and stretched tight across its bones, its movements jerky, unnatural. The world was no longer solid. The ground beneath him buckled and shifted, warping as if reality itself was bending in on itself. The figure raised a hand, a long gnarled finger pointed at him, and as it did, a scream rang out, shrill and unearthly, ripping through the air like a knife. It was his own scream. The driver stumbled back, his breath ragged as the figure before him stepped forward. With each step it took, his own reflection, the one buried deep in his mind, seemed to become more real, more him. But it was wrong. The figure was not him. It was what he had rejected, what he had abandoned. It was a twisted reflection of his own soul. And it was angry. The air around them thickened, pulling at him, pressing against him like a force he couldn't escape. He could feel the weight of the past crashing down on him, the choices he had made, the things he had left behind. The hollow had shown him the path he had refused to take. And now it was demanding that he face it. "You left him to die," the figure hissed, its voice a warped echo of his own. "You abandoned your true self, your true path. Now you will pay the price for what you've chosen." The words were like poison, sinking deep into his chest. The driver's pulse quickened, his head spinning as the figure's hands reached out toward him. Its fingers were cold, icy cold, and they brushed against his skin like claws, sending a jolt of freezing terror through his body. The touch was not just physical. It was something deeper, something that clawed at his soul. "Come back to the forest," the figure crooned. "Come back to where you belong." The words, laced with dark promise, filled his mind, wrapping around his thoughts. It was as though the figure was speaking directly to the darkness within him, feeding it, coaxing it to the surface. The driver's heart hammered in his chest as he recoiled, stumbling away from the figure. "No," he whispered, "I won't go back." But the figure didn't stop. It followed him, its movements unnatural, jerky, yet relentless. The mist closed in once more, but this time it wasn't just the mist. The very fabric of the hollow was shifting around him, warping as if the entire place were alive and reacting to his fear. His body moved on its own, his legs carrying him back toward the altar, toward the body that was now standing before him, now reaching for him. The hollow was tightening its grip on him, pulling him into its grasp, and it was too strong, too powerful. The whispering voices began again, a chorus of hundreds, thousands, all echoing through the mist, through the earth beneath his feet. You cannot escape. You cannot outrun your past. He tried to run, tried to escape, but his legs wouldn't move. His body was frozen in place, trapped in the suffocating grip of the hollow's reality. The world around him had turned into a mirror, reflecting every choice, every regret, every moment he had ever wished to forget. Face yourself. The figure was closer now, so close that its cold breath brushed against his skin, its empty eyes never leaving his. And then it spoke one final time. Join us, forever. The figure's words hung in the air like the last breath of a dying storm, its voice reverberating through the hollow, rippling with the weight of inevitability. Join us, forever. The phrase echoed around him, a deep, sinister whisper that gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. The mist around him began to twist and turn, swirling faster now, as if the hollow itself was closing in, collapsing the distance between him and the shadowy figure that had been born from his own deepest fears. The figure's eyes, those hollow, empty voids, bore into him. There was something more than just darkness within them. There was a promise, an ancient, unshakable promise. The hollow wasn't merely a place. It was a reflection of himself, a mirror that showed him the things he had never dared to face. The anger, the regret, the choices made in fear. He was trapped in this moment. He could feel the pressure, the crushing weight of it all. His past, his present, all of it coiling around him like the tendrils of the forest he had fled. There was nowhere to run, no place to hide. The ground beneath him pulsed like a beating heart, and the mist seemed to close in tighter with each passing second. It wasn't just the figure that was closing in, it was the very reality of his life, of everything he had tried to escape. The hollow-eyed figure took a step forward, and with it, the earth trembled beneath him, shaking with a force that rattled his bones. The mist thickened, clinging to his skin like ice, and he felt the familiar pull of the forest's call. The same pull that had brought him to this forsaken place. The same pull that had lured him to the lodge all those years ago, that had urged him to keep running when all he should have done was face it. His pulse raced. The shadows of the forest crept into his vision, looming like dark, twisted giants in the corners of his mind. The forest was calling him, urging him to surrender, to return, to accept the fate he had long denied. You cannot run from your true nature, the figure said, its voice growing louder, more insistent. You are one of us. You always have been. The forest is a part of you, knows you, and now it will claim you. The world around him began to shift again, the mist melting into shapes, trees, dark silhouettes rising from the ground like forgotten spirits. He could see the lodge again in the distance, its dilapidated walls glowing faintly under the pale moonlight. The memories of that night, the storm, the strange, unsettling sense of dread that had gripped him as he and his friends had stepped into the lodge, they rushed at him in a flood. The terrible sense of something being wrong, something waking in the earth beneath his feet. The hollow was feeding on those memories, on his fear. It was alive, and it was waiting for him to make his choice. This is not a choice you can escape, the figure intoned, its voice dripping with malice. You were born of the forest, born of the darkness that feeds it. And now, the time has come to accept your place in it. The driver's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to scream, to fight back, but the words were so powerful, so overwhelming, that they seemed to lodge in his throat like stones. His mind spun, each thought tangled in a web of confusion. The hollow was right, wasn't it? It had always been right. The forest was part of him. The choices he had made, the people he had lost, they were all tied to this place, to this moment. There was no escaping it. And then the mist parted again, clearing for just a moment. In the center of the clearing stood a mirror. It wasn't like any mirror he had seen before. This one was jagged, the edges cracked, as if it had been shattered and pieced back together in some crude, desperate attempt at restoration. The reflection that stared back at him wasn't just his own, it was a version of himself that he had long tried to bury. A version that had accepted the darkness, that had embraced the call of the forest instead of running from it. The figure in the mirror grinned, a dark, twisted grin that stretched across its face like a curse. You see? This is who you truly are, the figure whispered, its voice dripping with malice. You've fought it for so long, but you can never escape it. The hollow knows you. It made you. The driver's legs shook beneath him. His mind reeled with the weight of the words. The mirror was showing him the truth, wasn't it? Wasn't it? The reflection was him, but it wasn't. It was something darker, something that had been lying dormant inside of him all these years, waiting for this moment to emerge. The choices he had made, the things he had left behind, the people he had abandoned, they had all led him here to this moment of reckoning. The hollow had been with him all along, and it had been shaping him. His flight from the forest, his attempt to escape the darkness, it was all part of the cycle, part of the twisted fate that had been laid before him. The forest had called him, had lured him back with the promise of truth, of redemption. But the truth was not what he had expected. It was darker, more insidious. It was a trap. "You cannot outrun your destiny," the figure said again, its voice now thick with an almost paternal tone, as if speaking to a child who had long resisted understanding. "You were always meant to return. The forest has claimed its own, and you will join us." Tears stung his eyes as he stared at the mirror. He wanted to reject it, to scream at the reflection, to disappear, to go away. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't tear his gaze away from it. It was like an anchor, pulling him deeper into the void, forcing him to confront the darkest parts of himself. The reflection grinned wider. "You are the forest, and you will always belong to it." For the first time, he understood the full weight of those words. He wasn't just running from the forest. He was running from himself. From the part of him that had always been tied to the land, to the ancient forces that whispered through the trees. The very soil beneath his feet had once been his home, his birthright. And now it was calling him back, demanding that he return. The mist rose once more, and the figure took another step toward him, its cold hand reaching for him. The driver's breath was shallow now, panic clawing at his chest, suffocating him. This was it. This was the choice. He could feel the hollow closing in, wrapping around him like a shroud. The forest was alive, and it was waiting for him to make his final decision. Would he succumb to it, accept the darkness within him and become part of the land once more? Or would he fight, and in doing so, lose the last part of himself that he had left? The moment was drawing near. The figure's hand hovered inches from his chest, its coldness seeping through the air, wrapping itself around his heart. The mist, thick and suffocating, clung to him like an unshakable weight, pulling him toward the mirror. The figure's presence felt immense, a shadow that stretched far beyond the confines of this strange world. It wasn't just the figure he had to face, it was the forest itself, the hollow, a manifestation of everything he had feared, denied, and abandoned. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. The whispering voices, the distorted reflections, the earth beneath his feet that seemed to pulse with an ancient rhythm, it was all overwhelming. His breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. The weight of this place, this truth, was suffocating him. There was no escape, no safe ground. You cannot run from what you are. The voice, the figure, the hollow itself, it was all one. The forest has always been a part of you. It has waited for you just as you have waited for it. The time has come to stop hiding, to stop fighting. The words hung in the air, their finality like a weight upon his chest. His knees trembled, his body aching with exhaustion, but still, his mind refused to yield. There was something in him, a spark, however faint, that refused to let go of the possibility of escape, of freedom. But where was freedom? Could there even be such a thing in this place? A realm of twisted reflections, mirrors, and the suffocating grasp of the forest? "I can't," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I can't be like this." The figure smiled, or at least it seemed to. Its expression was a mocking parody of a grin, empty, hollow, just like the eyes that stared back at him. "You already are. And now you must accept it." The hollow shuddered, its mist rising around him, swirling faster, tighter, until the very air seemed to crackle with energy. The figure raised its hand again, and in that moment, the world trembled. It wasn't an earthquake or a storm, it was something deeper, something ancient. The earth groaned beneath him, the roots of the trees reaching toward him, their gnarled fingers stretching through the mist. Suddenly he felt it, a presence, a dark, consuming weight that pressed down on him like a suffocating blanket. His chest tightened, his heart pounding in his ears, and the edges of his vision blurred. It was the forest, alive and watching. It was the thing he had fled for so long, the thing that had waited in the shadows for him to return. And now it was here. The mist parted, revealing the full extent of the vision before him. The mirror that had once reflected his own distorted image was no longer just an object. It was a gateway. The cracked surface shimmered as if the glass were alive, pulling him in with an unseen force. He could feel the pull now, stronger than before, tugging at his very soul, drawing him toward the void within. "It is time," the figure said, its voice now an unsettling calm. "Step into the void. You will find your true self there. You will find the truth that has been hidden from you all these years." The driver's feet moved before he could think, his legs carrying him toward the mirror with a will of their own. He fought against it, his body screaming to stop, to run, but the force of the hollow of the reflection was too powerful. It was him, that other self, the one who had never left, the one who had been waiting. With a final, shuddering breath, he stepped forward. The moment his foot crossed the threshold of the mirror, everything dissolved. The world, the mist, the trees, all of it vanished, replaced by an endless void. He was floating, suspended in the dark, the air thick with silence. There was no up, no down, no ground beneath his feet, no sky above, just the infinite nothingness stretching in all directions. "You have come home." The voice, familiar yet foreign, filled the void. It was the figure's voice, but now it had changed, become something darker, deeper, more sinister. The emptiness around him seemed to ripple with the words, each one vibrating through his chest, rattling his bones. "This is where you belong. Here in the darkness, in the hollow. This is your true home." His mind screamed for him to wake up, to escape, but there was no escape, no return. The darkness closed in on him, surrounding him, suffocating him. And in the distance, in the center of the void, a figure emerged. At first it was a blur, a shadow, but as it drew closer, the details became clear. It was him. But it wasn't him. It was the version he had seen in the mirror, the twisted, hollow reflection of himself, the one that had been waiting in the depths of the hollow all this time. The figure grinned, its eyes empty and dark, its smile wide and cruel. It was a mirror of everything he had rejected, everything he had hidden away. It was everything he had feared. "You are me," the figure said, its voice a twisted mockery of his own. "I am you, and now you are me. Welcome home." He recoiled, but there was nowhere to go. The figure's hand reached toward him, and with each movement the air seemed to grow heavier, the darkness closing in. The driver could feel the coldness of the figure's touch even before it made contact, a biting chill that pierced through his very soul. "Accept it," the figure whispered. "Accept what you are. Embrace the darkness." His breath came in ragged gasps as the figure's hand hovered just inches from his chest. The darkness around him pressed in tighter, squeezing the air from his lungs. He felt as though he were suffocating, drowning in the emptiness. The voice, his voice, repeated the same words over and over, its echoes reverberating through his mind. "Embrace it." He closed his eyes, his heart racing. He could feel the darkness pulling him, tugging at every corner of his being. It was calling to him, urging him to give in, to surrender to the emptiness. He felt the cold, hollow pull of the forest again, the same call that had haunted him all his life, the same pull that had drawn him here. For the first time he realized the truth. He was never meant to escape the hollow. He had always belonged to it. The forest, the earth, the darkness, they were part of him. He was part of them. There was no running, no way out. You have already made your choice. And in that moment he understood. The forest had won. The dark figure, him, stood before him, its empty eyes a reflection of everything he had fought to forget. The world, the void, the ever-present mist, all seemed to pulse in rhythm with his racing heart. The very air around him vibrated with an unnatural hum, a low, rumbling frequency that seemed to resonate deep within his chest. The hollow was not just a place, it was alive, and it had been alive long before he had ever set foot in its depths. And now it had claimed him. "You are part of this," the figure said, its voice a twisted, distorted version of his own. "The hollow is not a curse. It is your home. And now you are one with it. There is no turning back." The words echoed in his mind, reverberating through the vast emptiness around him. He wanted to scream, to fight, but there was no escape. He could feel the cold, biting presence of the figure closing in on him, the very air growing heavier with each passing moment. The darkness, thick and suffocating, seemed to wrap itself around him like an invisible hand, pulling him closer, claiming him. For a moment he stood there, frozen, his mind awash with the memories that had led him here. The forest, the lodge, the endless, gnawing fear that had followed him for years, dragging him back to the place he had tried so desperately to escape. The hollow had always been with him. It was the pull in the back of his mind when he had left the forest all those years ago. It was the whispering voices that had called to him in the silence of the night. It was the shadows that had always lingered at the edge of his thoughts. And now the hollow had found him again. It had waited for him, watched him run, and now it had brought him back to where he belonged. The figure took a step forward, its presence overwhelming. The air grew colder, the mist thickening as it closed in on him, wrapping him in its icy grip. The figure's hand extended once more, reaching toward him with the same dark, predatory grace it had shown before. But now the figure was not just a reflection. It was him. It was the part of him that had always remained, the part he had buried deep within himself. The darkness. "This is who you are," the figure whispered, its voice cold and final. "This is what you have always been. The forest knows you. And now you will know it." The driver's body trembled as the figure's hand brushed against his arm. A surge of cold shot through him like ice flooding his veins. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, it felt as though the very world around him had stopped, as though time itself had frozen in that single instant. The figure's touch was not just cold, it was void. It was the absence of everything. The absence of warmth, of light, of life. And then, as if in response to the figure's touch, the world around him shifted. The mist thickened, swirling with an intensity that was almost violent. The air grew heavier, the space around him warping and distorting, as if reality itself was bending to the will of the hollow. He felt the ground beneath his feet begin to tremble again, but this time, it wasn't just a faint vibration. It was a deep, resonating quake, one that rumbled through the very earth, shaking the air itself. "The hollow is awake," the figure said, its voice low and resonant. "And so are you." The trembling of the ground grew more intense, and for the first time, the driver felt the weight of the earth beneath him, as if it were a living, breathing thing, pushing him down into the depths of the hollow itself. The ground cracked beneath his feet, splitting open like the maw of some great beast, and from the rift emerged roots unlike any he had seen before. They were twisted and black, stretching upward, grasping at the air like the fingers of some ancient, forgotten creature. The figure's eyes gleamed with a dark, predatory satisfaction. "The forest calls to you," it said, its voice now laced with a strange, hypnotic rhythm. "It has always called. And now you will join it." The roots began to move, slithering toward him with a speed that was almost impossible to comprehend. They wrapped around his legs, tugging at him, pulling him toward the yawning chasm that had opened in the ground. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind screaming, but his body was already succumbing to the pull of the hollow. The roots tightened around his ankles, and with a force that was both terrifying and inevitable, they dragged him forward. "This is your destiny," the figure intoned, its voice now a distant murmur in the back of his mind. "You cannot fight it. You will return to where you belong." His legs moved of their own accord, dragged deeper into the chasm, into the very earth itself. The darkness, the cold, the weight of the forest, it all rushed at him, suffocating him, enveloping him like a cloak of despair. The figure's words, once distant, now seemed to echo through every fiber of his being. "Embrace it," the figure urged. "Embrace the darkness." He tried to fight it. He tried to pull away, to break free from the suffocating grip of the roots that held him tight, but it was no use. The forest, the hollow, was too strong. It had been waiting for this moment, watching as he had run, as he had tried to escape. And now it had him. The chasm deepened, the roots pulling him deeper into the earth. He could feel the darkness closing in, could feel the weight of it pressing down on him from all sides. The cold, the silence, the suffocating blackness. It was overwhelming. But even in that moment there was a part of him, a small, desperate part, that still clung to the hope that there was a way out. "There is no way out," the figure whispered, its voice low and final. "You belong to the forest now, and it will never let you go." And with that, the world around him dissolved into complete darkness. The darkness swallowed him whole, pulling him deeper into its suffocating embrace. His body moved as though it had no will of its own, dragged down by the cold, twisting roots that coiled around his limbs. The air was thick with the scent of earth, damp and ancient. Every breath felt like it might be his last, his lungs fighting for oxygen in the crushing weight of the hollow. His mind, already frayed and exhausted, struggled to hold onto a shred of clarity. There was no sound, only the steady pulse of his heart and the soft, eerie hum of the roots that wound their way deeper into the earth. The figure, the hollow-eyed reflection of himself, was no longer in front of him. But its presence lingered, a heavy weight pressing on his chest, on his very soul. It was as though the figure had become a part of the darkness itself, a shadow that could never be shaken, never be escaped. He could feel the roots tugging at him, pulling him further down, further into the belly of the hollow, as though the earth itself wanted to consume him. It was cold, colder than anything he had ever felt before. A deep, bitter chill that gnawed at the very marrow of his bones. It was the chill of something older than time, something older than humanity itself. The hollow was alive and it was hungry, his chest constricted with panic. He wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything, but his limbs felt as though they were made of lead, heavy and unresponsive. The roots that bound him were relentless, winding around his body like serpents, squeezing the breath from his lungs, dragging him deeper. He could feel the earth closing in around him, the walls of the hollow pressing against him from all sides. There was nowhere to go. And then, just as the last ounce of his strength began to fade, the world around him shifted again. The roots seemed to release their grip for just a moment, and he found himself suspended in midair. His eyes fluttered open, and he realized he was no longer in the earth. The roots, the darkness, they were gone. In their place was a vast, endless cavern. The air was different here. It was cool but not suffocating. A faint, eerie light glowed from the walls, casting long shadows across the stone floor. The cavern stretched on forever, the darkness beyond it impenetrable, but the light seemed to pulse like the heartbeat of the hollow itself. It was a soft, rhythmic glow that seemed to call to him, beckoning him deeper into the heart of the cavern. His feet found the ground beneath him, solid, stable. But the moment his toes touched the cold stone floor, a strange sensation washed over him. It wasn't fear, it was something deeper, something ancient. The ground beneath him felt like it was alive, breathing, shifting in response to his presence. The air seemed to hum with energy, and the light from the walls flickered, almost as though it were alive. "Welcome home." The voice was soft at first, a whisper carried by the wind, but it grew louder with each passing moment. It was not the figure now, it was something else. Something older, more primal. And it was speaking directly to him. "You have come to the heart of the hollow. The place where all things are born and where they return. The forest has always called to you just as you have called to it." He took a shaky breath, his heart pounding in his chest. The cavern around him felt endless, its expanse so vast that it was impossible to fathom. There were no doors, no walls, only the glowing light and the pulsing hum of the cavern itself. "You have fought it for so long," the voice continued, its tone almost compassionate. "You fled the forest, you ran from the darkness, but it was never your enemy. It was a part of you, and it always has been. You are not meant to escape. You are meant to return." A cold shiver ran down his spine as the words sank in. Return. To where? To the hollow? To the forest? The very thought of it sent a jolt of fear through him, and yet there was something else beneath that fear. Something that tugged at the core of his being, a pull deeper than any instinct he had ever felt. It was like the cavern itself was calling to him, like the walls, the earth, the very air. They all knew him. They recognized him. "This is where you were always meant to be," the voice whispered again, softer now. "This is your home, your true home. The forest chose you long ago. You were born from it, and now you must return to it. There is no escaping it." His knees buckled beneath him, and he fell to the stone floor, his hands bracing against the cold surface. The weight of the words seemed to crush him, as though the very earth was bearing down on him, pushing him into the depths of the cavern. His mind screamed for him to resist, to run, to fight, but the energy in the air, the pull from the walls, from the cavern, it was too much. The forest had always been a part of him. He had tried so hard to forget it, to run from it, but every step he took had always led him back here. The hollow. "You are one with the hollow," the voice said, more insistent now. "You are bound to it just as it is bound to you. You are part of its cycle, its endless rhythm. And now you will join the forest once more." The stone beneath him shifted, groaning as though the very ground had come alive. A crack appeared in the cavern floor, stretching outward like the veins of some great creature. The crack widened, and from within it, something stirred. He could hear the sound of something moving, something ancient, powerful. The ground trembled beneath him, and he could feel the pulse of it, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. And then, emerging from the crack, a shape began to rise. It was like a tree. No, it was a root, a single, massive root, rising from the earth like the trunk of an ancient tree. It was black and gnarled, twisted with time, and covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. The root stretched toward him, and he could feel the same pull he had felt when he was trapped by the smaller roots. This was the source, the center of it all. The heart of the hollow. The voice whispered again, softer this time. "This is your true form. This is what you are meant to become." He stared at the root, mesmerized by its dark beauty, by the power that emanated from it. He could feel its pull deep within him, drawing him closer, and for the first time he understood. This was not just about the forest. This was about him. About what he had become. The hollow was not something that had captured him. It was inside him. The driver's hands shook as they pressed against the cold stone. The figure, the twisted reflection, was no longer just a mirror. It was a part of him. And as the root rose higher, he understood. There was no escape. The massive root, black and twisted, rose before him like some ancient beast, a symbol of the hollow's power, its strength. It stretched toward the heavens, its gnarled form curving upward, as if reaching for something far beyond the cavern's walls. The symbols carved into its surface glowed softly, pulsing in time with the eerie hum that reverberated through the air. It was alive, and yet it was something more, something that seemed to contain the very essence of the forest, of the hollow itself. The ground beneath him trembled again, a low rumble that seemed to come from deep within the earth. The walls of the cavern, made of jagged stone and rough rock, seemed to shift and bend, as if responding to the presence of the root. It was like the very fabric of the world was changing, warping under the weight of this ancient power. "You have come home." The voice was clearer now, more defined. It was not just a whisper anymore, it was a deep, resonating sound that filled the cavern, echoing off the walls like 1,000 voices speaking in unison. The voice of the hollow, of the forest, of the root itself. The forest calls to you. It has always called. And now you will answer. He wanted to resist. He wanted to scream, to fight back, to tear himself free from the grip of this place. But the pull, the overwhelming weight of the hollow was too strong. It was like something inside him had been awakened, something that had been dormant for years, buried deep within his heart. The call of the forest was not a sound, it was a feeling. It was a compulsion, an urge to give in, to surrender. It was a part of him, and he could feel it stirring in the pit of his stomach, rising like a flood. The root's movements grew more deliberate, more insistent, as if it could sense his resistance, his hesitation. It slithered across the ground like a serpent, its surface slick and wet, covered in a strange, shimmering substance that seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. As it moved, the cavern seemed to shift with it, the walls bending and warping as though the very space around him was alive. "You were always meant to return." The words echoed in his mind, and for a moment he felt the weight of them settle deep into his bones. The hollow was not just a place. It was a part of him, just as much a part of him as the blood that flowed through his veins, the air he breathed. The memories of the forest, the lodge, the mist, the trees, came flooding back in an overwhelming rush. He could see it all again, as if the forest were standing before him, calling him home. And then he saw something else. A vision of his past. His life before the hollow, before the forest, before the dark pull that had led him here. He saw himself, a younger version, standing at the edge of the woods. He remembered the excitement, the adventure, the promise of something more. But there was fear too. Fear of what lay beyond, of what was hidden in the trees. And so he had run. He had left. But the hollow had never left him. You cannot outrun your true self. The words were like a dagger, cutting through the haze of his thoughts. The voice was not just the hollow now, it was something deeper, something more primal. Something that had always been there, just beneath the surface. He closed his eyes, but the images didn't fade. They only grew stronger. The forest was alive around him, a living, breathing thing that reached into his very soul. The trees whispered his name. The roots twisted and coiled around his legs, pulling him closer to the center of the cavern, to the heart of the hollow. The very air seemed to shimmer with power, the energy of the forest radiating from the root that now dominated the space. "You are not separate from the hollow," the voice said, soft and soothing, yet terrifying in its finality. "You are the hollow. You are the forest. You are its soul. And now you will join it." A sudden surge of energy rushed through him, overwhelming him, filling him with a strange sense of clarity. It was as if the mist, the trees, the very earth around him were speaking to him, not in words but in raw emotion. The fear, the darkness, the power, it was all a part of him, a part of the hollow. He could feel it deep inside him, coursing through his veins. It was in his blood. It was in his bones. He opened his eyes, and the root before him seemed to respond. It stretched higher, its branches reaching toward the ceiling of the cavern, its surface now alive with a pulsating energy. The symbols carved into it glowed brighter, and the very walls of the cavern seemed to hum with life. It was as if the root was calling him, beckoning him to come closer, to embrace his place in this dark, endless cycle. Without thinking, he stepped forward. His feet moved of their own accord, his body drawn to the root with a force greater than his own will. The air around him seemed to thicken, the pull of the forest growing stronger with every step. The darkness, the hollow, it was no longer something he feared. It was something he was becoming. The root's surface rippled, as though reacting to his presence. As he drew closer, the symbols on it seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, a rhythmic, hypnotic sound that filled his mind. The darkness within him, the fear, the hesitation, it was fading. "Come," the voice whispered, its tone almost tender now. "Come to the heart of the hollow. Accept your place." The root's gnarled form loomed before him, and without another thought, he reached out. His hand brushed against its surface, and the moment his fingers made contact, a surge of power shot through him. It was cold, colder than anything he had ever felt, but it was also alive. The sensation flooded his mind, rushing through his body like a storm. The roots beneath his feet seemed to come alive, reaching up to wrap around his legs, binding him to the earth, to the hollow. And in that moment he understood. He wasn't just a visitor to the hollow. He was its heir, its child, its next iteration. "You are the forest," the voice whispered, now a chorus of thousands, millions of voices, echoing through the very earth. "And the forest is you." The world around him swirled into chaos, the cavern becoming a blur as the power of the hollow surged through him, binding him to it. He could feel the essence of the forest, the trees, the mist, the roots, all of it flowing through him, alive in his veins. The hollow had claimed him, and there was no going back. The world around him blurred into an endless sea of shadow, a swirling void where the walls of the cavern twisted and bent, as if they were made of liquid. The darkness seemed to pulse, shifting in rhythm with his heartbeat. Every breath he took felt heavier, each inhalation a deeper connection to the hollow. His fingers still tingled from the touch of the root, the coldness of it sinking into his skin, wrapping around his very soul. The power, raw and ancient, surged within him like a river breaking through a dam, flooding his thoughts, his body, his very existence. For the first time he understood what the hollow was. It wasn't just a place, a forest, a collection of trees and mist. It was life. It was the heart of the earth itself, the pulse of the world that existed long before humanity walked its soil. And now he was part of that pulse. He could feel it in his veins, deep and overwhelming, an endless rhythm that bound him to everything. To the trees, to the roots, to the soil beneath his feet. The earth was his skin. The wind was his breath. The rain was his tears. "You are the hollow." The voice echoed through his mind, a chorus of millions of voices, each one a whisper of wind, the rustle of leaves, the creak of ancient trees. It was no longer a single entity speaking to him. It was the forest itself, the collective soul of the land, reaching out to him. You are its heart, its spirit, its voice. His body trembled as the root beneath his hand seemed to respond to him, stretching higher, its dark branches curling and twisting in the air, seeking something. The symbols on its surface flickered like fireflies, lighting up with an eerie, pulsating glow. It was alive, this root, and it recognized him. It knew him. It had always known him. As the root writhed, the ground around him shifted once more. The stone beneath his feet cracked open, and from the rift emerged more roots, hundreds of them, snaking their way through the ground like tendrils of some ancient creature. They curled around his legs, his arms, tightening their grip with a force that was both gentle and unyielding. There was no pain in it. It was a connection, a bond. "Join us." The voice, now clearer, was filled with something deep, primal. A promise, an invitation. He closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the sensation of the roots wrapping around him, pulling him into their depths. The very earth beneath him seemed to breathe, exhaling a soft, almost melodic hum that vibrated through his body. It was as if the world had become one, as if the boundaries between him and the land, between him and the forest, had dissolved. He was not just standing in the hollow anymore. He was the hollow. The roots continued their slow, deliberate climb up his body, encircling him like the embrace of an ancient, forgotten deity. He could feel them working their way into his skin, merging with him, threading through his veins, becoming a part of him. It was a sensation like no other, neither painful nor uncomfortable, but something deeper, something right. It was as if this was where he had always belonged, where he had always been meant to be. The air grew heavy again, the faint hum of the roots growing louder, more insistent. And then, suddenly, the world began to shift around him. The cavern walls stretched and bent, twisting upward like the trunks of ancient trees, their branches spreading wide. The floor beneath him became soft, almost like grass, and the scent of damp earth and wet foliage filled his lungs. The very air seemed to shimmer with life, with energy. "Welcome to the true hollow," the voice whispered, now a distant murmur, as if coming from all directions. "The place where time does not exist. The place where life is endless and death is but a memory." He opened his eyes, and the world that greeted him was no longer the cavern. It was a forest that stretched on for miles, its canopy high above him, bathed in soft, ethereal light. The trees were massive, their trunks twisted and gnarled with age, their branches heavy with leaves that shimmered in the fading twilight. The air was thick with mist, swirling around his feet, rising and falling like the breath of the earth itself. This was the hollow. But it was different from what he had known. This was its heart, its soul. the place where all life began and returned. The very land that had called to him all these years, the place he had fled from. It had never left him. It had always been waiting. You will never leave this place. The voice was soft now, almost soothing. You are part of this world now. You are part of its pulse, its breath. You will become its protector, its keeper, its voice. The roots, which had once only been around him, now stretched far beyond him, twisting through the earth like veins, spreading throughout the entire forest. They grew into the trees, into the soil, into the sky. They reached into every corner of the land, binding the forest together in a vast, intricate network of life and death. And then he felt it. A presence. A deep, ancient presence, pulsing through the roots. It was the essence of the forest, the spirit of the hollow, and it was inside him now. He could feel its ancient power flowing through his body, filling every fiber of his being. It was no longer just the land he had come to understand, it was his soul. The forest has claimed you. The words were not spoken aloud, but felt, resonated deep within him. The roots that had wound themselves around him began to loosen, retracting back into the earth, leaving behind only the faintest traces of their touch. He looked down at his hands and saw them changing. The skin was darkening, thickening, becoming like bark, like the trunks of the ancient trees that surrounded him. His fingers elongated, twisting into shapes that were unfamiliar but somehow right. His breath came in slow, deep inhalations as his body slowly transformed. He was becoming something else, something new. He could feel the forest coursing through him, the roots that once held him now part of him, woven into his very being. His body was no longer just human. It was the hollow, the forest. He was both of them. You are the keeper now, the voice continued, its tone full of reverence. The protector of the hollow. The one who will guide the forest, who will watch over its life and death. You are its heart, and it is yours. As the transformation completed, he stood there in the heart of the hollow, the forest surrounding him in all its infinite, terrifying beauty. The trees swayed in the wind, their branches creaking, the leaves rustling like whispers. The earth beneath his feet hummed with life, as if the very soil were alive, breathing with him. He was no longer a man. He was something older, something deeper. He was the forest's voice, its keeper. And as the last remnants of his humanity faded, he understood. The hollow had always been waiting for him. It had called to him. And now he had answered. The transformation had been slow, agonizing, but in its aftermath, the world around him felt different. He could feel it, feel the pulse of the earth beneath his feet, the sway of the trees above him, the way the leaves danced in the wind. Everything was alive in a way he had never known, everything interconnected, bound by the roots that spread like veins through the very land itself. The hollow was no longer just a place. It was a part of him, and he was a part of it. He was no longer an outsider. He was the forest's heart, its protector, its guardian. His body, if it could still be called that, was no longer human. The bark of trees covered his skin, rough and thick, yet somehow warm, alive with the slow, steady rhythm of the forest. His hands had elongated into gnarled, branch-like appendages, fingers long and twisted, like the limbs of ancient trees that had stood for centuries. His eyes, once human, were now like the glowing depths of the forest, dark and full of secrets, their pupils a deep, endless black. Every breath he took was filled with the scent of moss and earth, of rain-soaked soil and the heavy perfume of the trees. The forest hummed with an ancient energy, and as his senses adjusted to this new existence, he felt it all. The wind brushing through the leaves, the shifting of the soil, the faint whispers of creatures hidden in the underbrush. The hollow was alive, and it was vast. It spread out before him, an endless sea of trees, mist, and shadows. And now he was a part of that endless expanse. He was the forest, and the forest was him. You are the guardian now, the voice of the hollow whispered in his mind, softer than before but no less powerful. You will guide this land, protect it, and ensure that its balance is maintained. You are the pulse of this place. You are its will. He could feel the weight of the responsibility settling on his shoulders. It was not something he could escape, not something he could run from. The hollow had chosen him, had made him its own, and now he had no choice but to accept the mantle of guardian. It was a sacred duty, an ancient one, passed down through the ages. He was part of a cycle much older than him, older than humanity itself. The hollow was its own living entity, a force of nature that had always been there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to call its protector home. The wind rustled through the trees, and the shadows seemed to deepen, shifting in response to his new presence. The creatures of the forest, those hidden beings that had always existed in the periphery of human sight, began to appear. Strange, ethereal creatures with glowing eyes and bodies made of moss and shadow, wandering the underbrush with quiet grace. They watched him, but they did not approach. They were waiting just as the forest had been waiting. He felt it then, a sudden, overwhelming sense of belonging. He wasn't just a man transformed, he was a living part of this place. The trees whispered his name, the wind carried his thoughts, and the earth itself seemed to rise up to meet him. His connection to the land was total. He could feel the roots stretching far beneath the soil, their tendrils reaching out to every corner of the hollow, linking him to the very core of the earth. He was not just observing the forest, he was part of it. He could feel every pulse, every shift of life, every heartbeat of the land. And it felt natural, like this was always meant to be. "What will happen to those who trespass?" he asked, his voice now carrying an otherworldly resonance, a deep, rumbling tone that seemed to echo from the depths of the hollow itself. The voice of the hollow, now both malevolent and ancient, responded. "Those who enter with ill intent will find themselves lost. The forest protects itself. It shields its secrets, its heart. Those who come to harm it will be swallowed by it, just as the roots swallow the earth. It will take them, and they will never find their way out." A chill ran through him, but it was not fear. It was understanding. The hollow was not a place to be reckoned with. It had existed long before humans had walked its land, and it would continue to exist long after they were gone. The forest had always been a living, breathing thing, its roots stretching deep into the earth, its branches reaching toward the sky. And now he was its protector, its voice, its keeper. The mist around him thickened, swirling like a living thing, wrapping itself around his feet, climbing up his legs, caressing the bark of his skin. The wind carried the scent of rain and damp earth, and with it came the distant sound of something stirring, something dark. He could feel the presence of something ancient, something powerful, just beyond the reach of the trees. He turned his head, eyes narrowing as he peered into the shadows, his senses sharpened to an almost inhuman degree. The forest was calling to him, urging him to step deeper into its heart, to embrace the darkness that dwelled within its depths. The hollow was never still, never silent. It was always shifting, always changing, always waiting. And now he was its keeper, its guardian, its heartbeat. Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled, a low rumble that sent ripples through the air. The trees shook, their leaves rustling like a low murmur of voices. Something was approaching. Something big. He felt the pulse of the forest shift, a deep, unsettling vibration that rippled through his body. The creatures of the forest, those ethereal beings, scattered into the shadows, hiding from whatever was coming. The wind picked up, howling through the trees as if trying to warn him, as if it could sense the danger approaching. "The hollow is never at rest," the voice murmured, distant yet omnipresent. "There are always forces that seek to disrupt its balance, to twist it, to use it for their own gain." The air grew colder, the mist thickening, as if the forest itself were drawing in a breath. The earth beneath his feet seemed to vibrate, the roots deep in the soil groaning with tension. The trees bent slightly, as if leaning forward in anticipation. He could feel it now, the presence, a dark force moving through the forest, approaching him with deliberate purpose. It was something other, something that didn't belong in this world, something that sought to tear at the very fabric of the hollow. He could feel its malice in the air, the weight of its intent. And so, as the guardian of the hollow, he stood tall, rooted to the earth, ready to face whatever was coming. His mind, his body, his soul were one with the forest, and the forest would protect itself. He was no longer just a man. He was the embodiment of the hollow's will, and he would defend it no matter what. The presence in the forest was undeniable. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the very atmosphere had thickened with an unnatural force. It moved through the trees, brushing against the leaves, disturbing the underbrush, but there was no sound, no footsteps. It was like a shadow, a cold gust that slipped through the cracks in the world and wound its way through the hollow like a serpent. He could feel it, this thing, slithering closer, its energy seeping into the earth, disturbing the roots beneath him. The trees themselves seemed to groan in response, their bark twisting as if in pain. The wind, once soft and gentle, now howled through the canopy, whipping at his face, carrying with it an icy chill that settled deep into his bones. The hollow was aware of the intrusion. It had always been aware of such things, and it would not stand idly by. The hollow protected itself. His senses sharpened, heightened by the forest's power, and he could feel the vibrations in the earth as it moved. The intruder was still some distance away, but it was getting closer, closer with every passing second. He felt the tug of something deep within him, a compulsion to confront it, to stop it before it could do any harm to the land he had sworn to protect. His connection to the hollow was stronger than ever now, and with it came a deep, primal sense of duty. He was the forest, and the forest was him. There would be no mercy for those who sought to harm it. He moved, slow at first, his limbs heavy with the ancient weight of his transformation. The roots beneath him twisted, shifting as if they were guiding his path, pulling him in the direction of the disturbance. The trees parted in front of him, the mist clearing, revealing the path ahead. The forest was alive, guiding him toward the threat. It knew what needed to be done. A deep rumble vibrated through the earth again. It was closer now. His feet, once human, now settled against the soft, damp earth like the roots of a tree, a part of the land. The wind howled, and the mist thickened once more, swirling around him in a ghostly dance. The hollow's breath quickened, and with it, his own. He could feel it now, the presence. It was not like the creatures of the forest. It was darker, more malevolent. It was the kind of force that sought to corrupt, to twist the natural order into something unrecognizable, a blight on the land. And as the guardian, it was his duty to ensure it did not spread. The first sign of it came from the edge of the forest, a flicker of shadow moving against the wind, moving through the mist. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally long, like the branches of a tree twisted by years of decay. Its form was obscured by the mist, but there was no mistaking the sinister energy that pulsed from it. It moved silently, the weight of its presence suffocating the air around it. "You should not have come here," he muttered, his voice now deep and resonant, like the earth itself speaking. The words felt strange on his tongue, foreign and ancient, but they were true. The hollow had never allowed such things to enter without consequence. It had protected itself from intruders for millennia, and it would not allow this one to cross its threshold. The creature moved again, its long limbs creaking, the sound like the cracking of ancient wood. The mist parted in front of it, revealing its twisted, gnarled form. A towering mass of shadow and decay, its body covered in what seemed to be rotting foliage, its face obscured by a mask of dark, moss-covered wood. It looked almost human, but it was something more, a thing born from the dark places of the world, a manifestation of corruption. "I am the root of this land," the guardian spoke, his voice louder now, carrying the weight of the hollow's will. "And you do not belong here." The creature paused, its head tilting slightly as if it could sense the power within him, the ancient force that surged through his veins. Its eyes, glowing faintly beneath the mask, locked onto him, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind died down. The trees went silent. The earth itself seemed to still, as though awaiting the outcome of this confrontation. The creature's lips, if it had lips, twitched into a twisted smile. "You think you are the forest's protector," it said, its voice low and hollow, like the sound of dry leaves scraping across stone. "But you are nothing more than a tool. A puppet, bound to the will of the hollow. You cannot control it. It will consume you just as it consumes everything." The guardian felt a pang of something deep inside him, an unsettling awareness. The creature was right in one sense. He was bound to the hollow. But what it didn't understand, what it could not know, was that he was no longer just a servant. He was the hollow. He had become its voice, its heartbeat. It had given him life, and in return he had given it his soul. Together they were one. "You are wrong," the guardian said, his voice trembling with the force of the hollow's power. "I am not a servant. I am the will of the forest. The hollow will never consume me. It is my essence, and I will protect it." The creature's smile faltered for a moment, its eyes narrowing. The air around them thickened with tension, a storm brewing in the heart of the forest. The wind picked up again, whipping through the trees, howling as though it were alive. The forest seemed to respond to his words, the roots beneath him stirring, the trees leaning closer, the shadows deepening. The hollow was awakening, rising to meet the challenge. And with that, the creature lunged. Its long limbs moved with unnatural speed, its twisted form barreling toward the guardian like a living shadow. The earth beneath it seemed to buckle, the roots snapping and twisting in its wake. The very air seemed to vibrate with the creature's fury, its intent to destroy. But the guardian was ready. With a sudden, fluid motion, he reached out, his gnarled fingers brushing against the roots beneath him. The earth responded instantly. The ground trembled, and the roots surged upward, twisting and coiling around the creature's limbs, binding it in place. The creature screeched, its voice a shrill, distorted cry, but it was no match for the power of the hollow. The roots tightened, pulling it back, holding it in place, their grip like iron. The guardian stepped forward, his limbs now moving with the grace of the forest itself. His eyes, now glowing like embers, locked onto the creature's masked face, and he spoke again, his voice carrying the full weight of the hollow's will. "You are not welcome here." The roots coiled tighter, pulling the creature to the ground, its limbs snapping and cracking under the pressure. The forest was not kind to intruders. It never had been. And as the creature struggled, the guardian took a step back. The wind died down. The trees, the earth, the hollow, they were silent now, waiting for the final moment. The creature's eyes, its hollow, glowing eyes, locked onto him one last time. "This is not over," it hissed, its voice filled with malice. "The hollow will fall. It will all fall." And with that, the last of the creature's strength faded, its form dissolving into a cloud of dark smoke, the roots releasing their grip as it vanished into the air, like a fading nightmare. The hollow was still. The guardian stood alone in the quiet aftermath, his heart beating with the rhythm of the land. The forest was safe for now, but he knew this was not the end. The hollow would always be tested. It would always be challenged. But he was ready, for he was the forest's voice, and the hollow would never fall. The wind shifted again, its cool breath brushing against the guardian's bark-covered skin as the last remnants of the creature faded into nothingness. The hollow stood in stillness as though holding its breath, watching the trees bend and sway in response to the earth's slow, rhythmic pulse. The guardian's heartbeat, slow and steady, blended with the sound of the wind rustling through the branches. Yet there was something more now. A lingering feeling, like a whisper carried through the roots deep in the earth, was filling the air. The battle was over. The creature was gone. But the hollow, despite its victory, had not returned to the calm it once knew. There was an unsettled energy in the air, a sense that something had been disturbed, that the balance had shifted in ways not fully understood. The land was no longer still, no longer silent. The guardian could feel it deep within him, beneath the surface of the earth, beneath the roots. "You have done well, guardian." The voice of the hollow was calm, but there was a certain edge to it now. A note of weariness, of something more. He felt its presence pressing into his consciousness, like a constant hum, a vibration in the depths of his soul. It was not the voice of reassurance this time, but of something older, wiser. But this is far from over. He stood still for a long moment, allowing the forest to speak to him, allowing the roots to stir and whisper their secrets. The land was not yet at peace. He could feel it in the trees, their branches shaking slightly, their leaves trembling with an unspoken anxiety. The air was heavy, the mist hanging low, like a shroud that refused to lift. It was as though the earth itself knew that something had stirred in the hollow's depths. Something had been awakened. The creature that had entered the forest was not the true threat. It was only a shadow of something larger, something older, something that had always existed in the periphery of the hollow's existence. It had been lurking for centuries, perhaps even longer. But it had waited. It had bided its time. And now it was drawing closer. The guardian closed his eyes, reaching deep within himself. His connection to the hollow was profound, but even that could not reveal all the secrets the earth held. The roots below him pulsed with energy, an ancient and vast network that spanned across the land. It was the hollow's lifeblood, its veins, and as he felt deeper into it, he caught glimpses, flickers of something ancient, something powerful, pulling at the edges of his perception. Something stirs in the roots, the voice of the hollow continued, a deep, resonating whisper now. A force that seeks to fracture the balance we have maintained. It is not a creature, not a being, but something more. A presence. A darkness that feeds on the energy of the hollow itself. The guardian's pulse quickened, a deep rumble rising from within him. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low, the rumbling power of the forest rippling through every word. He could feel the earth vibrating with the same question, the same unease. "It is the void." The word struck him like a bolt of lightning. The void. The ancient darkness that had existed before the first trees grew, before the first roots sank into the earth. It was the absence, the shadow that lingered at the edges of all things, waiting to consume, waiting to devour. It had always been there, lurking in the depths of the hollow, a force of nature that could not be fought, could not be destroyed, only contained. "The void seeks to undo what has been done," the voice continued. "It wishes to return all things to nothingness, to unravel the roots that bind this land, to tear apart the very essence of life itself. And it is growing stronger." The guardian's form seemed to shift, his limbs tightening as if reacting to the name of the void. His skin, the bark of the trees, the leaves and branches that surrounded him, they all seemed to tremble, responding to the presence of something darker than even the hollow itself. The land was not at peace. The threat was not over. It was only just beginning. The void was the opposite of everything the hollow represented. While the hollow was life, growth, and regeneration, the void was stagnation, decay, and destruction. It was the absence of all things, a cold, empty force that fed on the very fabric of reality. And if it was allowed to spread, to consume, the hollow itself would wither and die. What must be done? The guardian asked, his voice heavy with determination. He could feel the hollow's pull, its strength, its unwavering resolve. This was not a force that could be ignored. This was something that had to be stopped before it could unravel the land, before it could drown the roots in darkness. You must go deeper, the hollow whispered, its voice softer now, almost like a lullaby, to the heart of the roots. The void lies there in the deepest reaches of the hollow. It waits in the place where life began and where it will one day return. The guardian's mind filled with images, the deep, hidden places of the forest, places untouched by the sun, where the roots burrowed into the earth like ancient veins of a sleeping creature. He could feel it, the void pulsing like a dark, malicious heartbeat, waiting for the moment when it would rise from the depths and consume everything. The heart of the roots, he whispered to himself. He had never ventured there before. No one had. It was a place of legend, a place even the forest itself feared. But now it was the only way. The roots beneath him shifted again, rising from the ground like ancient snakes, their gnarled forms twisting in every direction. The wind picked up once more, its sharp bite against his skin as he stood in the center of the hollow, feeling the weight of the land's call to him. The trees whispered to him, whispers of warning, of guidance. They too felt the growing shadow, the creeping darkness that threatened to overtake the hollow's peaceful depths. It must be done, the hollow's voice came again, its tone heavy with the gravity of what lay ahead. The void will not relent. It will consume everything, if not stopped. The guardian nodded. There was no time to waste. The roots shifted, parting like the branches of a great tree, forming a path that led deep into the heart of the hollow. He took a step forward, his limbs moving with the ancient power of the forest. He could feel the earth beneath him, the hum of the roots, pulling him toward the unknown. He was no longer just a man, no longer just the guardian of this land. He was a force of nature, a living embodiment of the hollow, and he would protect it, no matter what. As he moved deeper into the forest, the shadows grew longer. The mist thickened, curling around his legs, whispering in the language of the roots. He was getting closer. The void was near, and there was no turning back. The heart of the roots awaited. The path through the forest grew darker with each step, the trees pressing closer, their branches like skeletal arms reaching down toward him, as if trying to pull him deeper into the earth. The mist, thick and heavy, curled around his legs, whispering faintly in the language of the roots, a low hum that seemed to reverberate from the depths of the hollow itself. The air was thick with a sense of anticipation, a feeling that the very land was holding its breath, waiting for something that had long been prophesied. The deeper he went, the more intense the presence of the void became. It was subtle at first, a faint shiver in the air, a coldness that seemed to creep from the ground and into his bones. But as he pressed forward, it grew stronger, more oppressive. The trees around him began to lose their vibrant green, their leaves turning dark as if they were being drained of their life force. The roots beneath him, which had once been so full of life and energy, seemed to throb with a distant, unnatural pulse, one that didn't belong to the hollow. The deeper you go, the more the void will try to pull you in, the hollow's voice warned, softer now, distant. It feeds on fear, on doubt. It will twist your mind, twist the roots themselves. You must not allow it to take hold. His hand, now more branch than flesh, curled into a fist as he pressed forward, feeling the weight of the hollow's warning in the pit of his stomach. The path ahead was narrow, the trees growing so close that their limbs nearly blocked out the sky. The air grew thick with the scent of decay, of damp, rotting earth, a smell that made the roots tremble beneath his feet. The further he went, the less he could feel the familiar hum of life around him, the less he could sense the energy of the forest. It was as though he were walking through a world that had been drained of its spirit, where the trees stood as empty husks, their roots withered, their leaves brittle. He was getting close now. He could feel it. The ground beneath him began to sink, softening into a spongy, almost marsh-like texture. The earth was giving way, the roots stretching down deeper into the soil, but there was something wrong, something off about their movements. They no longer reached upward toward the light. Instead, they seemed to spiral inward, down into the earth, as if they were being drawn toward the center of the hollow, to the place where life and death intertwined. His pace quickened, his limbs moving with an urgency that matched the rhythm of his heart, which now beat louder in his chest, reverberating through the hollow. The pulse of the earth was growing faster, like the tremors before a storm. He was close, so close. He could feel the darkness gathering, a dense fog pressing in on him from all sides. And then he saw it. The roots of the forest were beginning to part, revealing a vast chasm in the ground. It was a deep, blackened hole, an unnatural void that seemed to swallow the light. The air around it was still, as though the very atmosphere was reluctant to enter. This was the heart of the hollow, the place where life had begun and where it would one day return. The place where the void lay in wait. The guardian took a deep breath, the scent of damp earth and rotting wood filling his lungs, and stepped closer to the edge of the chasm. The roots that had once been so full of life now twisted and curled around the edges of the hole, their once vibrant colors faded, their surfaces blackened and charred, as if they had been burned by the very darkness that emanated from the chasm below. "The void is not a creature," the hollow whispered, its voice now tinged with an unfamiliar sense of dread. "It is an absence, a force that devours everything it touches, life, memory, even time. It is the darkness before the dawn, the silence that comes after the last breath." The guardian stood at the edge, looking down into the abyss. The void pulsed in the darkness below, a shifting mass of shadow and mist, writhing like a living thing, a hungry maw that seemed to draw the light into itself. It was ancient, older than the hollow itself, and yet it had been kept at bay for eons, buried deep beneath the earth, locked away in the heart of the land. But now, the roots, the very lifeblood of the forest, were unraveling at the edges of the abyss. The void was escaping. "It is breaking free." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and the guardian could feel it, deep in his chest, a pressure building like a storm. The ground beneath him trembled, the roots shaking violently, the trees groaning in the distance. The hollow was alive, but it was struggling. It was fighting against something it could not contain. The darkness below seemed to beckon to him, a pull that was both terrifying and alluring. He could feel it. This was the heart of the forest, the place where the ancient power of the hollow originated, but it was also where the void's influence was strongest. It was a place of power and destruction, a place where the balance between life and death had always teetered on the edge of oblivion. "You must stop it," the hollow urged, its voice now a quiet murmur, as though it were fading. "You must close the chasm before it consumes everything, before it takes the forest and you with it." The guardian stepped closer, the roots around him growing more frantic, their twisted forms reaching out as if they too were trying to pull him back. He felt a strange pull from within the void, a whisper in the darkness that promised power, that promised freedom from the chains of the hollow. It was seductive, this darkness, and he could feel it gnawing at his mind, feeding on the doubts that lingered in the corners of his consciousness. But he could not give in. He was the hollow now. He was its protector, its heart. And he would not allow this darkness to destroy everything he had become. With a sudden, forceful motion, he reached down, his hands, now twisted branches, gripping the nearest root. He could feel the power surging through him, the raw energy of the hollow flooding into his body as he called upon its strength. The roots beneath him responded, twisting and curling around his limbs, pulling him closer to the edge of the chasm. And then he reached out with his mind, his senses extending into the void below, feeling the darkness that waited there, that hungered for him. The void answered. A whisper in his mind, a call to his soul, a promise that everything would be undone. But the guardian's resolve held firm. He was the hollow. He would not fall. Not now. Not ever. He closed his eyes, focused on the roots beneath him, and with a forceful, defiant breath, he drew upon the power of the earth, summoning the life force of the forest to fight back the void. The roots pulsed with energy, the earth itself shaking as he channeled the hollow's essence into the chasm, pushing back the darkness with every ounce of his strength. "I am the forest's will," he whispered, his voice rising like a storm, "and I will not let you consume it." The ground beneath him cracked, the void's presence faltering as the power of the hollow surged forward, filling the air with a blinding light. The darkness recoiled, but it did not relent. The battle was only just beginning. The ground trembled beneath his feet, the earth vibrating with the weight of an ancient battle, one that had been fought long before he had ever come to the hollow. The darkness below, the void, recoiled but did not retreat. It pulsed in the depths, a malevolent presence that seemed to thrive on the resistance, as if it sought to prove that nothing could stand in its way. The roots around him twisted and shifted, their once living tendrils now hardened and brittle, strained under the pressure of the struggle. The guardian's heart beat with the rhythm of the forest. He could feel it. The hollow was calling to him, its energy coursing through his limbs, through his very soul. It was a power older than time, older than life itself. But even that ancient force was not enough to completely banish the void. It was as if the two were locked in an eternal struggle, a war that would never truly end. The void was relentless, like an insatiable hunger, and it wanted nothing more than to swallow the very essence of the hollow whole. He could feel the weight of that hunger, the pressure of the darkness pressing against his chest. It was suffocating, pulling at his thoughts, at his very sense of being. The whispers from the void grew louder, more insistent, filling his mind with doubts, with promises of freedom from the chains of the hollow. The darkness was trying to consume him, just as it sought to consume everything else. "Give in," it whispered. "Join us. You cannot stop this. The hollow is just a shell, a fleeting thing. We are eternal. We are the true order. Everything else is but a flicker, a passing breath in the cycle of time." His hands, twisted like the roots of the ancient trees that surrounded him, clenched tighter, the gnarled bark of his fingers scraping against the cold stone beneath him. He could feel the pull of the void, a seductive force that promised release, a promise of an end to the pain, the endless struggle. But he could not let go. He could not let the darkness take him, take the hollow, take everything. The ground beneath him cracked further, a deep rift opening at his feet, exposing the chasm beneath. The void swelled with power, and the roots that had once wrapped around him seemed to recoil in fear, their once proud tendrils now withering and dying, drained of life. The forest was in peril. The very land itself was being consumed, its lifeblood being sucked away by the force that stirred deep within the heart of the hollow. "You cannot win," the void hissed again, its voice cold and mocking. "You are just a servant to the forest. You are nothing but a passing vessel, a fleeting moment in the great expanse of time. The hollow is nothing without us. It will die as all things must." The words echoed in his mind, gnawing at him, pulling at the edges of his resolve. For a moment the guardian faltered. The void's whisper was so convincing, so deep, that it threatened to drown him. He could feel his power beginning to wane, the hollow's pulse growing weaker, as if it too was struggling to hold on. But then he remembered. He remembered the trees, the roots, the very earth beneath his feet. He remembered the creatures of the hollow, the life that had flourished here for eons. The hollow was not just a forest, it was a living, breathing entity. It was life in its truest form, and he was not just its servant. He was its heart, its pulse, its protector. "No," he whispered, the word a steady mantra, growing louder with each breath. "I am the hollow, and I will protect it." With that, he planted his feet firmly against the cracked ground, feeling the earth beneath him stir, the roots beginning to awaken in response to his defiance. The power of the forest surged through him once more, stronger than before, as the trees around him seemed to breathe, their ancient limbs swaying in rhythm with his heartbeat. The wind howled, the leaves rustled, and the mist parted as if the very forest itself was coming alive to answer his call. The void recoiled again, the darkness swirling and shifting, like a cloud of smoke being blown away by the wind. It pulsed, thrashing against the oncoming tide of life, but it could not escape. The hollow was fighting back. The roots beneath him trembled, shaking off the corruption that had begun to take hold. They began to twist and stretch, reaching deep into the earth, pulling the energy of the land back into themselves. "You cannot bind the void with roots, guardian," the darkness snarled. "It is not bound by your will. It cannot be controlled. You cannot fight what is inevitable." But the guardian did not hesitate. He reached deep into the earth, deep into the very core of the hollow, and pulled. With a force that shook the forest to its core, he called upon the hollow's power, its lifeblood. The roots rose, twisting and turning, like serpents emerging from the depths of the earth, coiling around the chasm, wrapping themselves around the void. The air crackled with energy as the roots pulled tighter, weaving themselves together in a knot of living power, a barrier that separated the land from the darkness below. The void screamed, its voice a horrible high-pitched wail that echoed through the forest, shaking the trees and sending tremors through the ground. But the roots held fast. They stretched deeper into the earth, pulling the darkness back into its prison, forcing it to recede into the depths from which it had come. "This is not the end," the void hissed, its voice dripping with malice. "You cannot hold us forever. We will return, and when we do, it will be your end, the end of all things." The guardian's resolve hardened. The roots tightened further, and with a final, deafening crack, the darkness below was sealed once again. The chasm that had once opened before him was now closed, the earth solid once more. The void had been bound once again, at least for now. The forest stood still, the wind calming, the mist slowly receding. The world was quiet, save for the faint rustle of the leaves and the slow, steady hum of the earth. The roots beneath him, still alive, still pulsing with energy, began to pull back, their gnarled forms slowly retracting into the ground. The battle was over. But the victory had come at a cost. The hollow had fought back, but it had been wounded. The land was tired, its energy drained, its roots scarred by the corruption of the void. The guardian stood at the center of the forest, his body trembling with the strain of the battle, his limbs heavy with exhaustion. His connection to the hollow was still strong, but it was weakened, strained by the power he had just unleashed. "It is not over," the hollow whispered, its voice soft, yet filled with an ancient sorrow. "The void may have been sealed, but it will always return. Always. And with each time it comes, the hollow grows weaker." The guardian looked out across the forest, his gaze resting on the trees, the roots, the life that surrounded him. The hollow was alive, but it was fading. The land was not invincible. It could be harmed, corrupted. It could die, but not yet. He would not let it. Not while he still stood as its protector. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and a lingering chill. The forest had settled, but the peace was fragile, barely held together by the remnants of the battle. The guardian stood at the center of the hollow, his body trembling with the exertion, his breath slow and measured, but his mind racing. He had sealed the void for now, but the cost was clear. The land was weakened, its vitality dimmed, as if the very breath of the forest had been stolen away. The roots beneath him stirred restlessly, as if they could sense the dissonance in the land, the slow and steady drain of life that had begun to spread through the forest like an invisible wound. The mist, once thick and oppressive, had lifted slightly, but it still clung to the trees in wisps, the darkness in the air refusing to fully retreat. There was a coldness that hung around the edges of the hollow, something that had not been there before, a whisper of something forgotten. The hollow had always been alive, always brimming with energy, with power, the power of life itself. But now that pulse was faint, like the last breath of a dying thing. The guardian's connection to it was still there, deep within him, but it felt distant, stretched thin. The forest was calling out for help, but no sound came. The roots twisted uneasily, like they were trying to reach for something that was no longer within their grasp. "You have done what you could," the hollow whispered, its voice soft, reverberating deep within the guardian's chest. "But this is not the end. The void is gone for now, but it will return. And each time it will be stronger. It will seek to consume us all. It is its nature." The guardian closed his eyes, the weight of the hollow's words pressing against him like an unseen weight. He had fought the darkness with every ounce of his strength, but even he knew that it was not enough. The void would not be defeated by sheer will or power. It was a part of the cycle, a force that could never truly be eradicated. The hollow was not invulnerable, no matter how strong it had seemed. He had to act. He couldn't allow the land to wither any more than it already had. He couldn't allow the darkness to return and destroy everything he had sworn to protect. The weight of the hollow's legacy, the weight of the entire forest's survival, pressed against him, urging him to find a way to search for something deeper, something that could stop the void for good. "What must be done?" the guardian whispered, his voice hoarse, his limbs heavy with fatigue. "Tell me what to do." The silence stretched for a long moment, the only sound the faint rustling of the leaves and the slow, rhythmic pulse of the earth beneath him. The hollow's presence filled the space, its voice coming not from the air but from within his very being, like a whisper from the deepest corners of his mind. "You must seek the Heartstone." The words were unexpected, startling in their weight and clarity. The Heartstone. He had heard of it only in the oldest stories, tales told by the ancient trees, passed down through the ages. It was said to be the source of the hollow's life, the very seed from which the forest had grown. The Heartstone was not a physical object. It was a force, a living pulse that lay deep beneath the surface of the land, at the very center of the hollow. It was the heart of the forest itself, and it had been hidden away for countless generations. "The Heartstone is the only thing capable of binding the void for good," the hollow continued, its voice now a soft, somber murmur. "It has the power to heal the land, to restore the balance, to strengthen the roots. But it is not easily found. The path to it is hidden, and the journey is fraught with danger." The guardian's mind raced. The Heartstone. He had always believed it to be a myth, a legend, a tale told to the young trees as they grew in the forest. He had never truly believed in its existence. But now, in the face of the void's return, he understood. The Heartstone was the key, the only way to ensure the survival of the hollow, the only way to stop the void from consuming everything. "Where can I find it?" he asked, his voice steady despite the weight of his uncertainty. "Tell me how to reach it." The hollow hesitated. The world around him seemed to grow stiller, the air growing thick with a sense of foreboding. The roots trembled beneath him, their once strong pulse now a faint whisper. He could feel the hesitation, the reluctance in the very land. "The path is hidden in the heart of the hollow finally replied, its voice barely a whisper. "You must travel to the sacred grove. The Heartstone lies beyond its borders, where the light of the forest no longer reaches. Only those who are bound to the hollow can find it. And even then you must pass through the trials of the ancient ones." The sacred grove. He had heard whispers of it in the past, tales told by the elders of the trees, stories of a place untouched by time, a place where the oldest forces of the forest still resided. It was said to be a place of great power, but also of great danger. Many had ventured there, but few had returned. But the guardian had no choice. If the hollow was to survive, if the forest was to heal, he had to find the Heartstone. He had to face the trials that awaited him, no matter the cost. Without hesitation, he began to move, his limbs heavy but determined. The path to the sacred grove was not one that could be found easily, but the forest would guide him. The roots would lead him as they always had. The mist parted before him, as though the hollow itself were parting the veil between life and death. With each step, he felt the weight of his purpose settle upon him, the power of the hollow surging within him once more. The darkness of the void still lingered, still pressed against the edges of his consciousness, but he could feel the strength of the forest rising to meet it. The hollow was not defeated. It would not be defeated. He would find the Heartstone. He would restore the balance. And he would protect the hollow no matter the cost. The journey was long, and the hollow felt like a distant echo with each passing step. The once vibrant forest, which had always pulsed with life, now felt quieter, more subdued, as if holding its breath. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and moss, but even these familiar smells seemed to carry an undercurrent of something darker, something more oppressive. The trees around him, once towering giants filled with life, were now quiet, their limbs barely swaying in the breeze. The very atmosphere had shifted, as though the forest itself knew that the fate of the hollow was uncertain, and that the trials ahead would not be easily overcome. The path to the sacred grove was unclear, winding through parts of the forest he had never ventured into, places that were older, darker, where the trees grew thick and the roots twisted in unnatural ways. The mist had thickened again, swirling around his legs like a cold embrace, but he could feel the hollow's pulse growing stronger beneath him, guiding his steps as he pushed forward. He was not alone. The forest was still with him, still alive in ways he could not yet fully comprehend. "The Heartstone lies beyond the grove," the hollow whispered in his mind, the voice soft but filled with purpose. "To reach it, you must first cross the threshold. The sacred grove is a place of ancient magic. It is protected by forces older than time itself. But you will not be able to enter easily. You must prove yourself worthy." The guardian's gaze narrowed. "Worthy?" he repeated, his voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside him. "What do you mean? What trials must I face?" The hollow's response was slow, the silence between its words heavy with the weight of the unknown. "The grove is not a place for the faint of heart," it finally said. "It is a place where the deepest parts of the forest's magic converge. The trials you must face will test you, not only your strength but your very essence. The hollow is bound by its own rules. You must prove that you are more than its protector, more than its servant. You must show that you are one with it, that you are capable of bearing the weight of its heart." The guardian's pulse quickened. The words sent a chill down his spine, but there was no turning back now. He had already crossed too many thresholds to stop. The forest was his home, its life was his life, and the hollow's strength was his strength. He was bound to it, heart and soul. He would face whatever awaited him in the grove, and he would pass the trials no matter the cost. The path became narrower, the trees closing in around him. The air was thick with an ancient energy, something old and powerful. The mist clung to the ground, swirling in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, guiding him onward. As he walked deeper, he began to feel the weight of the land's gaze upon him, 1,000 eyes from unseen places watching, waiting, judging. He stepped carefully, his senses heightened, attuned to the smallest sounds in the air, the rustling of leaves, the whisper of the wind, the faintest crack of a branch. The hollow was shifting around him, its power ebbing and flowing like the tide. He could feel the life beneath his feet, the roots stretching and twisting in their hidden paths, but it was different now. There was a subtle unease in the land, a tension that hadn't been there before. The farther he traveled, the more the land felt unfamiliar, as though the very fabric of the forest had begun to fray at its edges. And then, just as the thought crossed his mind, the trees before him parted, revealing a vast clearing bathed in an eerie golden light. the sacred grove. It was not what he had expected. It was not a serene, peaceful place as he had imagined. Instead, it was an otherworldly space suspended between life and death, between reality and the ethereal. The trees in the grove were ancient, their trunks twisted and gnarled, their limbs reaching upward like clawed fingers trying to grasp the sky. The ground was covered in soft, glowing moss, and in the center of the clearing stood a massive stone, smooth and black, covered in intricate carvings that pulsed with a faint, green light. It was the Heartstone. He could feel its presence, its power radiating from it like the pulse of a living heart. But something was wrong. The air was thick with a strange energy, a hum that seemed to reverberate through his bones. The mist swirled around the grove, gathering in swirling eddies that seemed to have a life of their own. The trees surrounding the clearing were silent, their branches unmoving. There was a stillness in the air, an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe, like the very atmosphere was thick with magic, ancient and untamed. The guardian took a step forward, but the moment his foot touched the moss-covered ground, a wave of energy shot through him, sending a shock of pain coursing through his body. He staggered, his vision swimming for a moment before he caught himself. His connection to the hollow flared brightly for a moment, as if responding to the force of the grove's power. But it was fleeting. The energy was too strong, too wild for even him to fully control. A voice echoed through the grove, deep, ancient, and filled with power. It did not come from the air, but from the very roots beneath him, as if the earth itself were speaking. Who dares to enter the sacred grove? The voice was not kind. It was a warning, a command, and the trees around him creaked as if in response. The roots beneath his feet shifted, twisting and turning as if they were alive, reaching for him, testing him. The guardian stood tall, drawing strength from the hollow, from the forest that had given him life. "I am the guardian of the hollow," he called out, his voice steady. "I seek the Heartstone. I seek to protect the hollow from the void." There was a long silence. The mist thickened, and the roots beneath him shifted, their movements slow and deliberate. The ancient voice spoke again, this time softer, as if considering his words. "You seek the Heartstone, but what will you sacrifice to possess it?" The question hung in the air, its weight settling over him like a fog. The roots around him trembled, and the air grew colder. The guardian's chest tightened. He had known that the trials of the sacred grove would not be easy, but this question, this challenge, was not one he had anticipated. "Sacrifice?" he asked, his voice low, his heart beating faster in his chest. "What must I sacrifice?" The mist swirled around him, thickening into shadows that twisted and writhed like living creatures. The voice spoke again, this time with a chilling tone. "Everything. To protect the hollow, you must become one with it, not just in body but in spirit. You must give up what makes you who you are. Your identity. Your connection to the world of men. Only then will the Heartstone accept you." The words cut through him like a blade. He could feel the weight of them sinking deep into his mind, into his very soul. To protect the hollow, he must lose himself. He must give up everything that made him human, everything that had defined him before this journey. His heart ached at the thought, but the forest was his life. The hollow was his purpose. And so, with a quiet breath, the guardian took another step forward, determined. He had come this far. And if the price of saving the hollow was losing himself, then that was a price he would pay, no matter what it cost. The air grew heavier still, pressing against the guardian's chest with an almost physical weight. The mist swirled around his feet like phantom fingers, urging him to retreat, to turn back, but there was no turning back now. Not when the fate of the hollow hung in the balance. The roots beneath his feet trembled, stretching deep into the earth, as if feeling his resolve, as if they too were waiting for something. The moment when the land would call upon him to give up his very essence. The ancient voice echoed once more through the grove, reverberating off the trees, twisting and warping in the air like a melody long forgotten. To protect the hollow, you must give up all that you are. Your identity, your memories, your very being. Only then will you be worthy to wield the Heartstone's power. The guardian stood at the threshold of the sacred grove, the Heartstone before him, its dark, carved surface glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. The stone seemed to pulse, its rhythm synchronized with the beating of his heart. But with each pulse, the words of the voice hung in the air like a constant reminder. Sacrifice everything. Become one with the hollow. Lose yourself. The cost of this trial was not merely physical. It was spiritual, a loss so profound that it threatened to consume him entirely. He closed his eyes for a moment, drawing in a deep, steadying breath. His connection to the hollow was everything to him, the land, the trees, the roots. It had all become a part of him. He had given everything to the forest, and in return, the hollow had made him its guardian, its protector, its heart. But this was different. This was not just a matter of protecting the land. This was a matter of becoming it, of becoming something greater and older, something that had always existed but could never truly be understood by those who walked on two legs. The mist continued to swirl around him, rising up to his knees, to his waist, as if urging him into the depths of the unknown. The trees loomed over him, their gnarled forms casting long, twisted shadows across the ground. He could feel the presence of something ancient in the air, something that had seen the rise and fall of countless lives, of countless seasons. And now it was speaking to him, testing him. The voice of the grove rumbled again, its deep, resonating tone sending shivers through his limbs. What is it that you hold most dear, guardian? What is the heart of your spirit? What defines you as a being, as an individual? Is it your memories? Your past? Or is it the bond you share with this land? The question echoed through his mind, shaking loose fragments of memories, fragments of who he had been before he had become one with the hollow. He remembered faces, fleeting images of a life he had left behind. There were times of warmth and joy, moments of love and loss. He remembered the world beyond the trees, a world of cities and roads, of people and places that seemed so distant now, so far removed from the forest, from the hollow. But that world, that life, it felt distant, as though it belonged to someone else, someone he no longer recognized. His memories were fading, slipping through his fingers like the mist around him. There was no time left to dwell on them. The question remained, what was at the heart of his spirit? He took another step forward, closer to the heartstone. The roots trembled and the mist parted, revealing the stone in all its eerie majesty. The carvings on its surface shifted, their forms twisting into new shapes, their meanings obscure. The stone itself seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its energy thrumming in the air, drawing him closer, calling to him. The ancient voice spoke again, this time softer, almost like a whisper in his ear. What will you sacrifice, guardian? What part of yourself will you give up to wield the power of the heartstone? The guardian's breath caught in his chest. He had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, now that the decision lay before him, the weight of it felt unbearable. He was bound to the hollow, bound to this land, but what of the life he had once known? What of the world beyond the trees? Was he prepared to lose everything that made him who he was? I will give up my memories, the guardian spoke aloud, his voice quiet but steady. I will give up my past, my identity, my name. I will become one with the hollow if it means saving it. If it means protecting this land and all that it holds. The words felt like a pact, an ancient vow that bound him to the forest forever. As he spoke them, the heartstone pulsed with a sudden surge of energy, and the air around him seemed to shimmer. The mist parted completely, revealing the full extent of the sacred grove, and for the first time, the guardian saw the faces of the ancient beings that had watched over the hollow for countless ages. They were not human, nor were they entirely tree or root. They were something in between, beings of pure energy, their forms shifting and changing like the wind. Their eyes glowed with the wisdom of the ages, and they watched him with quiet, knowing gazes. They had seen all who had come before him, and they had judged them just as they were judging him now. The guardian felt his connection to the hollow deepen, a pulsing, radiant energy that surged through his chest and spread through his limbs. He could feel the forest's heartbeat, its rhythm, its pulse. He was the forest, and the forest was him. He had become the hollow not just in body but in spirit. But as the power of the heartstone filled him, he felt something else. A deep, aching emptiness, as if something inside him had been severed, taken away. The ancient beings around him nodded in approval. Their voices filled the air, not in words, but in pure understanding. You have chosen to sacrifice your past, they intoned, their voices harmonizing with the heartbeat of the forest. You have chosen to become one with the hollow, to carry its burden, its essence, within you. You have proven your worth. The heartstone now belongs to you. The stone before him began to glow brighter, its surface shifting and changing in response to the guardian's presence. The energy that had filled him surged to the surface, and with a final pulse, the heartstone released its power, sending a wave of radiant light through the grove. The light spread outward, touching every leaf, every branch, every root, every blade of grass. The hollow was healing. The balance was being restored. But as the light filled him, the guardian felt something else. His memories, the life he had left behind, began to slip away, fading into the distance like the mist in the wind. Faces blurred. Names became indistinct. The world beyond the trees felt more and more like a distant dream, something he could no longer touch, no longer grasp. He was the hollow now. He was its guardian, its heart, its spirit. And yet, as the power of the Heartstone flowed through him, he realized there was no turning back. He had become the Hollow, and the Hollow had become him. The guardian stood at the center of the sacred grove, the light of the Heartstone still pulsing within him, its energy entwining with the very essence of his being. His limbs felt alive with power, his senses heightened to an almost unbearable intensity. The Hollow's heartbeat thudded in time with his own, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth itself. The land, the trees, the roots, they were all part of him now, and he was part of them. The ancient beings who surrounded him, the spirits of the forest, had disappeared into the mist, leaving him alone at the very heart of the Hollow. The power of the Heartstone flowed through him, but with it came a deep, aching emptiness, a void that spread through his mind, unraveling the very fabric of his identity. His memories, the pieces of a life he had once known, were slipping through his fingers like grains of sand. He could feel them fading, becoming distant echoes, lost in the vast expanse of the Hollow's energy. The faces, the voices, the moments of his past, all were being consumed by the power he had taken on, consumed by the Hollow's ancient will. "You are one with the Hollow now," the voice of the Hollow whispered in his mind, soft yet all-encompassing. "The forest is your home. The land is your body. The roots are your veins. You are the heartbeat of the Hollow, and it is yours to protect, to guide, to nurture. But in doing so, you must give up what you were. You must become something more." The guardian closed his eyes, focusing on the energy that surged through him, the power of the Heartstone blending with the very life force of the Hollow. The weight of the decision he had made settled heavily on his shoulders. He had given up his past, his memories, his name. He had given up the very essence of his individuality in order to become the forest's protector. But as the power filled him, he realized it was not just his past he had sacrificed. It was everything he had once been, everything that made him who he was. He was no longer a man. He was the Hollow. But as he stood there, his mind drifting in the haze of the Heartstone's influence, he felt a strange shift, a stir deep within the roots that ran beneath the land. The Hollow was alive, yes, but it was also hurting. The damage done by the void, the corruption that had seeped into the land, still lingered. The forest was healing, but slowly, painfully. The roots that had once thrived with the energy of life were now fragile, their connection to the earth weakened. The mist still clung to the trees, a lingering reminder of the void's presence, a shadow that would not easily fade. He opened his eyes and looked around him, feeling the weight of the forest's gaze upon him. The trees stood tall and silent, their ancient trunks creaking in the wind, their roots shifting beneath the soil, as if reaching for something, anything, to restore what had been lost. The Hollow had been scarred, and it would take more than just the Heartstone's power to heal it completely. It would take time, patience, and the Guardian's unwavering dedication. He placed a hand on the surface of the Heartstone, feeling its pulse beat beneath his palm. The stone's energy flared in response, a sudden surge of light and power that reverberated through him. The roots beneath his feet trembled, and the earth around him began to shift, the soil stirring as if awakening from a long slumber. The Guardian's connection to the Hollow deepened even further, the power of the Heartstone now fully merged with his own. He could feel the forest's every need, its every breath, its every cry for help. He could feel the pulse of the land, the rhythm of life that flowed through the trees, the roots, the air. But with that power came the weight of responsibility, the burden of protecting the Hollow from the darkness that had once threatened to consume it. The void had been sealed for now, but it would not be the last time it came. The forces of darkness were patient, waiting for a moment of weakness, waiting for an opportunity to strike. And though the Guardian had become one with the Hollow, he knew the fight was far from over. The Hollow needed him, not just as its protector, but as its heart, its spirit. He was the forest's lifeblood now, and the forest was his. The mist around him began to dissipate, the air growing clearer, fresher, as if the land itself were beginning to breathe again. But it was a fragile breath, a tentative one, as if the Hollow were testing its own strength. The Guardian could feel it, feel the land's heartbeat slow, steadying itself, but still weak, still recovering. He knew that this was only the beginning. The Hollow had survived the void's first assault, but the scars it had left behind were deep, and they would take time to heal. The wind began to stir the branches above him, sending a gentle rustle through the trees, a soft whisper that seemed to speak directly to him. It was a message, a reminder. The Hollow was alive, but it needed him. It needed his strength, his focus, his unyielding will to protect it. And he would give it, for as long as he had breath in his lungs, as long as the Heartstone's pulse still echoed in his chest. "I am the Hollow," he whispered to himself, his voice steady, resolute. I am its guardian, its heart, and I will protect it no matter the cost. As the words left his lips, the ground beneath him seemed to vibrate, a gentle pulse that resonated deep within his bones. The roots around him responded, stretching deeper into the earth, drawing energy from the land to fuel their growth. The hollow was healing. Slowly, steadily, it was beginning to recover. But even as the hollow's power began to return, the guardian knew that the future was uncertain. The void would not give up so easily. The darkness would return, and when it did, the hollow would need him more than ever. But for now, the forest had its protector. For now, the heartstone was safe, and the hollow had a chance to heal. And he too would heal. Slowly, over time, he would come to understand what it meant to be the hollow, to live as its guardian, to become its heartbeat. His memories of the past, of the world beyond the trees, would remain a distant echo, a shadow of something he had once known. But he no longer needed them. He had the forest now. The forest was his home, his purpose, and he would give everything to protect it. The mist began to fade entirely, the sky above clearing to reveal the soft glow of the moon. The night was still, the only sound the gentle rustling of the leaves in the wind. The hollow was alive, and so was he. The guardian stood tall, his heart now beating in time with the hollow's, ready for whatever trials lay ahead. The stillness of the sacred grove began to feel heavier, almost oppressive. The trees around the guardian stood like silent sentinels, watching him with eyes that had seen countless seasons pass, felt the rise and fall of countless lives. The wind whispered through the branches, the rustling of leaves soft but laden with ancient secrets. Beneath his feet, the earth hummed with a quiet energy, the pulse of the hollow's heartbeat flowing through the roots, resonating in his bones. For a long time, the guardian stood in the center of the grove, his eyes fixed on the heartstone. It continued to glow softly, its power now fully integrated with his own, its rhythm aligning with his pulse. But despite the peace that had settled over the land, a feeling of unease lingered in his chest. He had become the hollow. He had embraced its power, its purpose. Yet something remained, something that gnawed at the edges of his consciousness, a whisper in the back of his mind that he couldn't quite grasp. The hollow was healing. He could feel it. The roots that had once been withered and weak now thrummed with life, reaching deep into the earth, drawing strength from the land itself. The trees had begun to stir, their branches swaying in the breeze, their leaves catching the light of the moon. But as the hollow revived, so too did the shadows. The guardian closed his eyes and took a deep breath, grounding himself in the energy that now flowed through him. The hollow was his life, his very soul. And yet there was a part of him that felt incomplete. The memories that had once made him who he was were gone, faded into the vastness of time, leaving only fragments behind. He had sacrificed everything to protect the hollow, to become its guardian, and in doing so, he had lost himself. He was no longer a man, not in the way he had once understood it. He had no name, no past, no face to remember. He was simply the hollow, its heart, its protector. But what did that mean? What was he now, if not the embodiment of the land? The wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest scent of something familiar. It was a memory, something from his past, something he had lost. The faint smell of pine, the scent of the earth after rain, the distant murmur of voices that no longer seemed to belong to him. It was fleeting, like a dream that slipped away the moment you tried to grasp it. But in that brief moment he remembered something. I remember. The thought seemed to echo in the empty space around him, though no sound came from his mouth. The guardian shook his head, trying to rid himself of the strange feeling that lingered in the air. The memory was like a shadow on the edge of his consciousness, something just out of reach. He had lost so much, but had he truly lost everything? Was there more to him than the hollow? The heartstone pulsed again, its energy flaring within him. His connection to it deepened, and with it, something else stirred. The roots beneath him trembled. A presence, ancient and deep, brushed against his mind. It wasn't a voice. Not quite. It was a feeling, an understanding that was beyond words. The hollow is more than just trees, roots, and soil, the presence whispered, its tone both gentle and firm, as if speaking to him from the deepest recesses of the land. It is memory. It is history. It is the land's story. You have given up your past to protect the future. But in doing so, you have become part of the hollow's story. And stories never end, Guardian. They echo through time. The Guardian's chest tightened. He had become part of the hollow's story. But what story was his to tell? What memories remained? His life before the hollow, his name, his family, his friends, his place in the world, had all but disappeared. Was there any piece of him left that was not bound to the land? You are not empty, the presence continued, its voice soft as though it were trying to reassure him. You have not lost everything. The forest holds your memories as it holds the memories of all who have come before you. The hollow remembers. The trees remember. You are a part of that memory now, guardian. A part of the forest's history. You are its future and its past. The guardian felt the weight of the words settle over him, their meaning seeping into his very core. The hollow didn't just exist in the present. It existed in the past too, in every leaf that fell, in every root that spread, in every gust of wind that whispered through the trees. It was alive with memory, alive with history, both the land's and his own. His identity, though buried beneath the power of the heartstone, was still a part of the forest. It was still there, intertwined with the very fabric of the hollow. The realization came slowly, like the first rays of dawn piercing through the night. He had not lost himself entirely. His memories may have faded, but they had not vanished. The hollow had absorbed them, woven them into its own story. He was the protector, yes, but he was also a part of the land, a part of the hollow's deep and ancient history. You are not alone, guardian, the voice whispered again, this time with a sense of finality. The hollow remembers you. It remembers your spirit, your essence. You are bound to it, and it is bound to you. For the first time since he had made the decision to give up his past, the guardian felt a sense of peace wash over him. He was not empty. He was a part of something greater. The hollow's heartbeat thudded in his chest, a rhythm that matched his own. His memories might have faded, but they had not disappeared. The land had taken them in, and in turn, it had given him something far more profound. The understanding that he was and always would be a part of this place. The wind picked up again, sending a gentle rustle through the trees. The mist that had once clung to the edges of the grove now dissipated entirely, leaving only the quiet hum of the forest around him. The hollow was healing, and so was he. But the future was still uncertain. The void was patient, and it would return. But for now the hollow was whole. The guardian was not alone. And together they would stand against whatever darkness threatened to consume the land. The peace that had settled over the sacred grove was fleeting. The wind began to pick up again, swirling in gusts that stirred the branches of the trees, sending whispers through the air. The guardian stood motionless at the center of the grove, his connection to the hollow now deeper than ever. The heartbeat of the land pulsed within him, steady and strong, but as the wind picked up, it was as though the very fabric of the forest itself was shaken. He could feel it, a shift, a disturbance like a sudden tremor beneath the earth. The trees creaked and groaned as if they too sensed the change. The hollow was waking up, but not in the peaceful way he had hoped. There was an undercurrent of tension in the air, a feeling of unease that gnawed at the edges of his consciousness. The hollow stirs, the voice of the forest whispered in his mind, its tone heavy with warning. The land is healing, but its wounds are not fully mended. There are forces that seek to exploit this moment of vulnerability. The guardian's breath caught in his chest. His senses were on high alert, every nerve in his body attuned to the land. The trees around him were shifting in ways they hadn't before, twisting, groaning, as though they were reacting to something deep beneath the surface. The mist had returned, thick and oppressive, curling around the trunks of the trees, flowing across the ground like an ominous tide. The heartstone pulsed within him, its power now fully integrated into his being, but its energy felt different. It was still strong, still vibrant, but there was a tension in its rhythm, as though it too sensed the impending threat. The guardian's gaze flickered to the horizon, where the darkening sky met the treetops. The clouds had begun to gather, swirling in heavy formations, dark and foreboding. A storm was coming, but this was no ordinary storm. It was as though the very heavens were responding to the disturbance in the land, to the shifting energy that had begun to ripple through the hollow. The void is not defeated, the hollow's voice echoed again, sharper now, more urgent. It waits, has always waited, and it will return. The storm is a harbinger. It is a sign of its approach. The guardian's heart quickened. He had known that the void would not be gone forever, but the urgency in the hollow's voice left him with no doubt that it was closer than ever. The storm that was now gathering above him was more than just a weather phenomenon. It was the manifestation of something darker, a shadow that had been biding its time, waiting for the right moment to strike. The trees around him began to sway more violently, the wind howling through the branches, the leaves tearing from their boughs and flying through the air like fragments of a broken dream. The mist thickened, swirling faster, coiling around the guardian's legs, as though trying to pull him down into the depths of the earth. The land itself seemed to be buckling, as if something beneath the surface was rising, something ancient, something powerful. The storm is not natural, the hollow whispered, its voice tinged with fear. "It is a manifestation of the void's influence. It is waking. It is returning." The guardian could feel the hollow's pulse growing erratic, like a heart struggling to beat in a body that was too weak. His chest tightened as he understood what was happening. The void was not just a force of shadow and darkness. It was an entity, a presence, a living thing that could manipulate the world around it, twist the very fabric of nature itself. It had once been sealed, locked away in the depths of the earth, but it had not been destroyed. And now, as the storm raged above, the guardian could feel it rising again, its dark power spreading through the land like poison. The wind howled again, tearing through the grove with a force that shook the ancient trees. The guardian stood firm, his feet planted in the soft earth, but he could feel the ground beneath him trembling as though it too was aware of the coming destruction. The hollow was weak, the void was rising, and the storm was its herald. "What can I do?" the guardian whispered to the hollow, his voice heavy with the weight of the realization. "How do I stop it?" The hollow's response was slow, its voice filled with sorrow. "You cannot stop it alone. The heartstone may be powerful, but the void is ancient, older than the forest itself. It feeds on the hollow's energy, on its life. The only way to truly stop it is to sever its connection to this land." The guardian's heart sank. Sever its connection? What did that mean? How could anyone, sever something so deeply woven into the very fabric of the world? "The heartstone is the key," the hollow continued, its voice growing weaker as though the storm's influence was starting to affect it. "But the heartstone alone cannot banish the void. You must seek out the source, the place where the void first broke through, where the earth itself was torn asunder." The guardian's mind raced, his thoughts fragmented in the face of the rising storm. The place where the void had broken through. The hollow's memory was vast, but even it was not infinite. The landscape had shifted over time, seasons had come and gone, and the places where the earth had been torn open had long been buried by centuries of growth. But somewhere, buried deep within the hollow, there was a place where the land was scarred by the void's touch. "You must journey to the depths," the hollow whispered. "The heartstone's power will guide you, but you must be prepared. The depths are not a place of light. It is a place of darkness and shadow, where the void's influence is strongest. If you are to survive, you must be ready to face what lies within." The storm above him had reached its peak. The wind howled like a beast in pain, the trees groaning under its force, their limbs bending and cracking with each gust. The mist around the guardian was thick now, swirling and oppressive, almost alive with the malevolent energy of the void. The guardian's hand instinctively moved to the heartstone, now pulsing within him, its energy stronger than ever. He could feel its power, its light, but it was dimming, flickering like a candle in a storm. The void was close. The storm was a warning, and the depths awaited. Without hesitation, the guardian turned away from the sacred grove, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead. The heartstone guided his steps, its pulse steady against his chest, and the land itself seemed to part before him, the roots beneath the earth shifting to reveal a path he had never seen before. The storm raged above, but the hollow, his hollow, was with him. And no matter what waited in the depths, he would face it. He would face the void. He would protect the land. For he was the hollow, and the hollow was his. The storm's fury reached its apex, an all-encompassing howl that seemed to swallow the very air around the guardian. He stood at the edge of the sacred grove, his feet rooted to the trembling earth, his heart beating in time with the pulse of the heartstone. The wind howled through the trees like a creature in pain, and the sky above churned with ominous clouds, their dark bellies thick with the promise of destruction. It was as though the entire world was on the edge of something far darker, something more terrible than he had ever imagined. But the guardian's resolve was unshaken. He had faced darkness before. He had given up his past, his memories, his very identity to protect the hollow. He had become its heart, its spirit. And now the hollow was in danger, its very existence threatened by the void. This storm, this primal fury of nature, was no mere weather. It was the harbinger of the void's return. The path before him, once hidden beneath the roots and the twisted branches of the ancient trees, now lay open. The earth shifted beneath his feet, the roots that once twisted and spiraled deep beneath the soil now forming a trail, a path that led into the depths of the forest, where even the most ancient of trees had never dared to grow. The land was calling him to the depths, the place where the void had first broken through, where the scar upon the world had been carved deep into the earth. The mist clung to the ground, curling like serpents around his legs, their icy tendrils seeking to drag him into the very bowels of the earth. The air grew heavy with the weight of ancient power, the force of the void's influence still lingering in the depths of the hollow, buried beneath layers of soil and roots. The guardian could feel it, could feel the pull of something far darker, far older, waiting in the depths below. The depths are not a place for the faint of heart, the hollow whispered in his mind, its voice now strained, weakened by the storm that raged around them. They are a place where the earth itself was torn asunder. The void's influence is strongest there. And in the depths, you will face more than just the darkness of the land. You will face the darkness of your own soul. The word sent a chill through the guardian's body. He had already sacrificed so much. His name, his past, his memories, but there was something in the hollow's voice now, something that hinted at an even greater trial, something deeper than he had yet faced. The path through the forest was winding, narrow, the trees growing thicker and older the farther he went. The air grew colder, the mist more oppressive, as though the very land was trying to keep him from entering the depths. The ground beneath his feet was slick with damp earth, and the wind carried a faint scent, a smell that was not the fresh earth of the forest but something else. Something decayed, something corrupted. The deeper he ventured, the quieter the world became. The wind that had howled through the trees above him was now a distant memory, replaced by a suffocating silence that pressed in from all sides. The trees around him, once so vibrant and alive, had grown twisted and gnarled, their limbs stretching toward the sky like desperate fingers clawing for a world they could never reach. Their bark was pale, sickly, and the ground around them was choked with dead leaves and broken branches, as if the land itself had been drained of life. The guardian's every step seemed to echo in the stillness, his breath the only sound in the suffocating quiet. The mist was thicker here, swirling around him like a living thing, obscuring his vision and disorienting him. It was as if the very land was trying to obscure his path, to lead him astray, but the heartstone pulsed within him, its steady rhythm a beacon in the growing darkness. As he descended deeper into the hollow, the air grew heavier, more oppressive. The roots that had once stretched toward the heavens now curled down toward the depths, their twisted shapes casting long, grotesque shadows on the earth. The mist, thick and suffocating, seemed to take on a life of its own, swirling around him like a serpent seeking to coil itself around his limbs. And then, ahead of him, he saw it. A fissure in the earth, a jagged crack that ran deep into the ground. The crack was wide, dark, and impossibly deep, as if the very earth had been ripped apart by some force beyond comprehension. From within the fissure, a cold, unnatural light flickered, a sickly green glow that illuminated the shadows around him. The air around the fissure was thick with a presence, a malevolent force that radiated from the depths like a poison. The void. The guardian felt a chill run down his spine, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. He had known the void was powerful, but standing before it, feeling its presence seep from the very earth itself, he realized just how little he understood of the dark force he was up against. It was not merely a force of destruction, it was a force of corruption, of decay. It fed on the land, twisted it, poisoned it, turning it into something unrecognizable, something unnatural. The fissure stretched out before him, its edges jagged and sharp, like broken teeth waiting to devour him whole. The void's presence filled the air, suffocating him, wrapping around him like a dark fog. The heartstone within him pulsed harder now, its rhythm quickening as though it too could sense the danger that lay ahead. "This is it," the hollow whispered in his mind, its voice faint, almost drowned out by the oppressive weight of the void. The heart of the corruption. The place where the void broke through. If you do not act quickly, the land will fall. The guardian's mind raced. The heartstone was powerful, but the void was ancient. It had been sealed once before, but only temporarily. It had waited, biding its time, feeding on the land's weakness, until it had found this opening, the crack in the earth that led straight to the heart of the hollow. He knew what he had to do. The heartstone was the key to stopping the void, but it could not do it alone. The guardian had to sever the connection between the land and the void, to seal the crack, to stop the corruption from spreading further. He had to face the very darkness that had broken the world, the force that threatened to undo everything he had fought for. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, his heart steady, his mind focused. The air grew colder still, and the ground beneath him seemed to tremble with the void's influence. The fissure loomed before him, its depths unknowable, its presence suffocating. But the guardian was resolute. He had become one with the hollow. He was its protector, its heart, and he would fight for it, no matter the cost. With a steadying breath, he reached out, his hand glowing with the energy of the heartstone. The land was waiting, the darkness was waiting, and the storm above raged as the guardian prepared for the most perilous battle of his existence. The fissure before him seemed to stretch endlessly into the earth, its jagged edges sharp like teeth that had torn through the very fabric of the world. The greenish glow from within flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced like ghosts around the edges of the crack. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a rotting scent that seemed to cling to the very atmosphere, as if the land itself had been poisoned by the void's influence. The guardian's breath quickened, his heart pounding against his chest, but his resolve was unwavering. The storm raged above, but it was nothing compared to the storm that brewed within the very earth. He could feel the power of the Heartstone pulsing in time with his heartbeat, its rhythm steady and sure, but even its energy felt weak here, as though the void's influence was sapping its strength. The land around him trembled, the ground vibrating beneath his feet as if the earth itself was groaning in pain, a deep, ancient ache that resonated in the bones of the hollow. The void is more than just darkness, the hollow whispered in his mind, its voice strained, its power barely audible in the weight of the presence that loomed over them. It is a corruption, a poison that seeps into the land, into the very soul of the forest. It is an infection and it has spread deep. The crack you see before you is not just a wound in the earth. It is a wound in the heart of the hollow itself. The guardian nodded grimly, his gaze never leaving the crack. The air was so thick with the void's power that it was nearly suffocating, pressing in from all sides, suffusing the very ground beneath him. He had faced many trials before, but none had been so dangerous, so overwhelming as this. The hollow was his home, his purpose. But now it was dying, slowly, inevitably, corroded by the void's relentless spread. The Heartstone in his chest pulsed again, its light flickering in response to the void's power. For a brief moment he felt a connection, a surge of understanding that coursed through him, through the land, through the hollow itself. The Heartstone was the key. It held the power to stop the void, but it would not be enough to simply use it. He had to sever the connection between the land and the void, to destroy the force that was spreading its corruption. But how? The fissure before him seemed to be alive, a wound that pulsed with dark energy, as though the land itself was breathing through it. He could feel the heartbeat of the earth, but it was a slow, erratic pulse, as if the life force of the hollow was being drained away, siphoned into the abyss. The guardian stepped forward, his hand outstretched, the Heartstone glowing brightly within his chest, casting an eerie light on the ground. The air around him grew colder, the wind howling in the distance as if the storm above had grown aware of his presence. He could hear the rustling of leaves far away, but the sound was distant, muffled, as if the world had been wrapped in a thick, suffocating blanket. The mist clung to his legs, swirling around him like a living thing, pulling him toward the crack, toward the source of the void's power. He fought against it, planting his feet firmly on the ground, feeling the pulse of the hollow beneath him. The earth trembled again, and for a moment he thought he heard something, a low, guttural sound, a rumble that seemed to come from the depths of the fissure itself. The void was waking. "You must reach the heart of the corruption," the hollow urged him, its voice growing fainter. "The Heartstone alone will not be enough. You must bind the void. You must sever the connection between the land and the abyss. Only then will the hollow be free." The guardian clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. He had given up everything to become the hollow's protector, its heart. He had faced the forest's darkness, its dangers, its trials. And now he would face the greatest trial of all. He would face the void. He stepped forward once again, his steps sure, his focus unwavering. As he neared the fissure, the air around him grew heavier, thicker with the void's influence. The Heartstone in his chest pulsed faster, its glow intensifying as he drew closer to the crack. The presence of the void loomed larger, pressing in on him from all sides, filling the air with a palpable weight, like the very earth itself was suffocating. He could feel the connection between the land and the void, the dark thread that bound them together. It was ancient, twisted, and strong, woven into the very fabric of the earth, as though the void had always been a part of the hollow, waiting for the moment to break free. The fissure before him seemed to pulse with life, its edges trembling as the power of the void surged within. The guardian reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and placed it against the edge of the crack. The moment his fingers touched the jagged stone, a surge of energy shot through him, cold, sharp, and alien. The void's influence coursed through his body, filling him with a sense of dread, of despair. It whispered to him, a voice not of words but of darkness, a promise of destruction. "You cannot stop me," the void's voice murmured, its tone cold and ancient. "You are part of me. You always have been. The hollow is mine and you will be too." The guardian's chest tightened. The void was right. It had always been there, lurking beneath the surface of the hollow, waiting for its chance to rise. But he would not let it win. Not now. Not ever. With a fierce cry, he drew on the power of the Heartstone, pushing its energy outward, sending a surge of radiant light into the fissure. The crack shuddered, the dark energy recoiling from the pure light, but it quickly retaliated, pressing back against him, filling the air with a screeching sound as the two forces clashed. The Guardian gritted his teeth, focusing all his will into the Heartstone. He had to sever the connection. He had to stop the void before it consumed everything. The earth beneath him trembled again, and the fissure widened, its edges glowing with the dark power of the void. The wind howled, the storm above raged, and the forest around him seemed to cry out in pain as if it too felt the void's touch. The Heartstone pulsed faster, its light flickering like a dying flame. But the Guardian stood firm. He had made his choice. He was the Hollow's protector, and no force, no darkness, would take that away. With a final, powerful cry, he thrust his hands into the crack, the Heartstone glowing blindingly bright as its power surged through the land. The void's presence screamed in the air, an agonized wail of resistance, but the Guardian would not relent. The connection between the land and the void was unraveling. He could feel it. The darkness was beginning to fade,